Sergeant Ryan
You
Mitchell
picked
took
the
one look
wrong
at the small
target.
woman standing inside his training hall, snatched the
Oh my
clipboard
God.
out of her hands, and threw it across the floor like it was garbage. Is this a recruitment office or a daycare? 150 soldiers laughed, loud, cruel, the kind of laugh that echoes. The woman didn't move, didn't blink, didn't pick up the clipboard. She just looked at him calm as still water and said nothing at all. And that silence should have terrified him. Because Ryan Mitchell had just insulted the one person on that base with the authority to end his career with a single phone call. Before we go on, please take 1 second to subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end of this story because the ending will hit you hard. And leave a comment telling me what city you are watching from so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Let's begin. The clipboard slid across the polished floor and stopped near the boots of a private in the front row. Nobody picked it up. Nobody dared. Captain Emily Carter looked down at it for a moment, then back at the man in front of her. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "that had my paperwork on it." Ryan spread his arms wide, playing to the room. "Oh, it had paperwork on it. Everybody hear that? The lady's got paperwork." More laughter. Not all of it real. Some of it was the nervous kind, the kind men use when they don't want to be the next target. "Ma'am," Ryan said, drawing the word out until it sounded like an insult, "I'm going to help you out here because I'm a nice guy. Whoever sent you to this building made a mistake. The administrative offices are 2 buildings down past the flagpole. Take a left. There's a nice bench outside. You can sit. You can have a coffee. Nobody will bother you." Emily didn't answer. "Did you hear me?" "I heard you." "Then why are you still standing in my house?" Emily tilted her head slightly. Just slightly. "Your house." "That's right. I wasn't aware the United States Army had started issuing deeds." The room went dead quiet for exactly 1 second. 1 second. And in that second, about 40 men in that hall realized something they couldn't have put into words yet, but felt in their stomachs anyway. She wasn't afraid of him. Not even a little. Ryan felt it too. He'd spent 11 years learning how to read a room, how to smell fear, how to find the soft spot in a man, and press on it until he folded. He'd never once had to work for it. Fear was his native language. He was fluent. And this woman was standing there like he hadn't said a word. So he did what men like Ryan Mitchell always do when the first punch doesn't land. He hit harder. You know what? He walked a slow circle around her boots deliberately loud. "Let me guess. You read a book? You watched a documentary? You had an uncle who served and now you think you understand what we do here. Sergeant, you people come through here twice a year. Clipboards, surveys, feelings. You want to know if we're being nice to each other." He stopped in front of her close enough that she had to look up at him. "We're not nice to each other. That's the whole point. Out there, nobody's nice. I'm the last man in your life who's going to be honest with you before somebody puts you in the ground." Emily said, "Are you finished?" "I haven't started." "Then start." Somewhere in the third row, a young private named Noah Bennett shifted his weight. He was 22 years old, 4 months out of basic, and he had exactly 0 authority in that room. But something in his chest had started to turn over slow and hot, and he couldn't make it stop. Ryan noticed the movement. Of course he did. He noticed everything. "Something to say, Bennett?" "No, Sergeant." "You sure? Because you moved. Men only move when they're thinking, and thinking is how privates get people killed." "No, Sergeant." Ryan turned back to Emily. "See that's discipline. Took me 3 weeks. He came in here soft, and now he's useful." Emily looked past Ryan at Noah for maybe half a second, just long enough. Then her eyes came back. "What's your name, Sergeant?" "Mitchell. Ryan Mitchell. And you don't need my name because after today, you're never going to say it again." "Mitchell," she repeated. 11 years, he stopped. 12, he said, and immediately hated himself for answering. 12, she nodded once like she was filing it away somewhere. 2 combat rotations. 3, another nod. The last one ended early. The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Ryan's jaw moved. "Who told you that?" "Nobody told me anything, Sergeant. I'm just making conversation." "You don't make conversation about a man's record." "No." Emily's voice never rose. Not once. That was the thing that would haunt every man in that room later when they went back to their bunks and stared at the ceiling and replayed it. She never raised her voice. You've spent 4 minutes making conversation about mine, and you don't have my record. You have a guess, and your guess is that I'm a clerk who wandered into the wrong building. That's not a guess. It's a guess, you just don't know it yet. There was a sound in the back of the room. Somebody had exhaled too loud. Somebody's nerve had cracked. Ryan swung around. Who said something? Nobody. Silence. 150 men standing at loose attention, staring straight ahead, and not one of them willing to be the one. That was when Emily understood the real problem at Fort Liberty, and she understood it completely in a single breath. It wasn't Ryan Mitchell. Ryan Mitchell was a symptom. The problem was the silence. 150 trained American soldiers, most of them good men, most of them brave, and not one of them would say a word. Not because they agreed with him, because they had learned over months and years that saying something costs more than staying quiet. And an army where nobody speaks is an army that can be broken from the inside without a single shot. She'd seen it happen, overseas, in places she couldn't name in a room like this. She had watched entire units rot from the middle out, not because the enemy was strong, but because the men inside stopped trusting each other. It never started with a battle. It started exactly like this, with a laugh, with a clipboard on the floor, with 150 men deciding it was safer to be quiet. Sergeant Mitchell, she said, how many of these men would tell you if you were wrong? What? Right now. If you made a mistake that was going to get one of them hurt, how many of them would open their mouth? Ryan laughed. All of them. No, Emily said. 0. Excuse me. You just proved it. You threw a superior officer's paperwork on the floor and not one man in this room moved to pick it up. Not because they're cowards, because they've learned what happens to people who move. A superior officer, Ryan smiled wide and mean. There it is. There's the play. You want to pull rank? Go ahead. Show me. What's on your collar? Emily's shirt was plain gray, no insignia, no name tape, no patches, nothing. Ryan gestured at her, triumphant, turning back to the room like a lawyer resting his case. Nothing. There's nothing on her. She walks in here with no rank, no unit, no nothing, and she wants me to salute her. He looked back. Ma'am, I've had guys try to run that on me at the gate. You know what a real officer has? Paperwork, orders, a name tape. I had paperwork, Emily said. You threw it on the floor. The silence that followed was so complete, you could hear the ventilation system. Ryan's smile flickered. Just for a fraction of a second. And Emily saw it. She'd built a career out of seeing things that lasted a fraction of a second. He recovered fast. He always recovered fast. That was his gift and his curse. You want to know how this works, he said. In here, rank doesn't mean anything. Rank is a word. What means something is what you can do. That's it. That's the whole religion. So if you want respect from these men, you don't get it from a piece of paper. You earn it on the floor. Is that an offer? That's a fact. It sounded like an offer. Ryan spread his arms. Take it however you want. All right, Emily said, and she started unbuttoning her cuffs. The room changed. You could feel it. 150 men who had been standing there enjoying somebody else's humiliation suddenly realized they might be about to watch something they couldn't unsee. Noah Bennett said out loud before he could stop himself, Sergeant, don't. Ryan turned so fast his boots squeaked. What did you say? Noah's mouth had gone dry. His heart was going like a hammer. He was 22. He had no rank, no standing, no protection, and every single instinct in his body was screaming at him to say, nothing, Sergeant, and disappear back into the wall like every other man in that room. He heard himself say, I said don't, Sergeant. Ryan walked toward him, slow. Say it again. With respect. Noah's voice cracked in the middle of it, and he kept going anyway, and that crack was the bravest sound in the building. With respect, Sergeant, maybe we should stop trying to embarrass her. Embarrass her? Ryan stopped 6 inches from his face. You think that's what this is? Yes, Sergeant, I do. You've been in this army 4 months. Yes, Sergeant. And you're going to tell me how to run my hall. No, Sergeant. I'm going to tell you she picked up nothing and you threw everything. Noah swallowed. That's all I'm going to say. Somebody in the second row whispered, oh God. Ryan's face went a color that had nothing to do with anger. and everything to do with something older and uglier. Humiliation, because a private had just said the thing that 149 other men were thinking, and now the thought was out loud, and out loud is dangerous. You want to stand with her, Bennett? Noah looked at Emily. Emily didn't help him. She didn't nod, didn't signal, didn't give him a single thing to hold on to. She just watched still as a stone because this right here was the actual test and she wasn't going to contaminate it. Noah looked back at Ryan. Yes, Sergeant. 2 words. 22 years old. Nothing to gain, everything to lose, and he said it anyway. And in the back of Emily Carter's mind, a door quietly opened and a name went into a file that would change that young man's entire life. He would never know it happened. Not for months. Not until the day the orders came through and he stood in a hallway holding paper he couldn't believe, trying to figure out who had seen him. But that was later. Right now, Ryan Mitchell was smiling again, and it was a bad smile. Fine, he said. Fine. You know what? That's beautiful. That's real chivalry, Bennett. So here's what we're going to do. He walked back to the center of the floor. Everybody out on the line, all of you. We're going to run a standard evaluation. Nothing special, nothing dangerous, just the basics. He looked at Emily. You said you had paperwork. I say paperwork's a word, so let's find out what's underneath it. Sergeant, said a voice from the doorway. Every head turned. Colonel Michael Hayes stood in the entrance with his hands behind his back. 58 years old, silver at the temples. The kind of man who had stopped needing to raise his voice about 25 years ago. Colonel Morrow, Ryan said. Sir, we're just running an evaluation. Hayes looked at the clipboard on the floor. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Emily. And here's the part nobody in that room caught because they were all looking at Ryan. The colonel's eyes went to Emily's hands, not her face. Her hands, the way she was standing, the angle of her feet. Something moved behind the colonel's expression. Something almost like a question. Who authorized this evaluation? Hayes asked. Sir, it's an informal. Who authorized it, Sergeant? Ryan's mouth worked. Nobody, sir. It's my hall. Your hall? Hayes let that sit. In the civilian. She's not on my roster, sir. No orders, no name tape. She walked in. Hayes turned to Emily. Ma'am, do you have business here? Emily met his eyes. Yes, Colonel, she said. I do. May I ask what it is you may ask? 3 words, and Colonel Michael Hayes, who had commanded men in 2 wars, felt the hair on his forearms stand up, because he had heard of that answer before. Once. In a briefing room in a country he wasn't allowed to name from a person he was never officially introduced to, and he had spent 19 years not asking about it. Sergeant Mitchell, Hayes said slowly. A word. Sir, with respect, if I could just finish. Sergeant, sir, I've got 150 men watching. If I walk out of here now because he caught himself barely because of an unidentified visitor, I lose every one of them. You know that. You taught me that. And there it was, the thing that made Ryan Mitchell dangerous and the thing that made him tragic. He believed it. He wasn't performing. Somewhere along the line, somebody had taught this man that leadership was a wall you could never step back from, and he had built that wall so high he couldn't see over it anymore. Hayes hesitated. 1 second, 2. And Emily saw it and understood the second half of the problem the colonel knew. He knew what Mitchell was, he knew what it was doing to the base, and he had been letting it happen because the man got results. She had come to Fort Liberty to evaluate security and leadership standards. She had just found a report. Colonel, Emily said, may I speak? Hayes nodded. Let him run it. Ryan blinked. What? Run your evaluations, Sergeant. Emily rolled her right cuff up 2 folds precise, then the left. Everything you've got, drills, weapons, medical, navigation, whatever's on the list. And when it's over, we'll talk about what we both learned. Ma'am, Hayes started. Colonel, Emily didn't look away from Ryan. I'd like the record to show it was his idea. The room made a sound, a low collective involuntary sound, 150 men breathing at once. Ryan Mitchell laughed, loud, too loud, and for the first time some of the men noticed that it was too loud. You heard the lady, he called out. Line it up, full evaluation, and listen up because I want every one of you to watch this. I want you to remember it, because this is what happens when somebody thinks a title makes them a soldier. He turned back to Emily and dropped his voice so only she could hear it. I'm going to be honest with you, ma'am. I'm going to enjoy this. Emily looked up at him. and she said something very quietly. I know. 2 words. And Ryan Mitchell felt something cold go through his chest for the first time in 12 years, and he didn't know why, and he told himself it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. They started with drill. It was supposed to be a joke. That was the point. Ryan called out the standard sequence, the one every soldier learns in the first week, and then he immediately went off script, the way instructors do when they want to break somebody. Faster. Off tempo. Commands stacked on top of commands, deliberately overlapping the verbal equivalent of pushing someone down a staircase. 150 men watched a small woman in a gray shirt execute every single one. Not adequately, not passively, perfectly. Not one wasted motion, not one hesitation. Her heels came together with a sound like a rifle bolt. When Ryan reversed a command mid-syllable, she was already moving with a correction before he finished the word, and the men in the front row later swore in bunks in the chow hall for years afterward that she had started moving before he said it. Ryan's voice got faster, Emily got cleaner. Somewhere around the 40th command, the laughter stopped. Not gradually, it just stopped, like a radio switched off. Ryan heard it stop. In a small, quiet, honest part of him, the part that was still a good soldier buried under 12 years of scar tissue, started sending up a flare. He ignored it. Halt. Emily halted. That's basic, Didum, Ryan announced to the room, breathing a little harder than she was. That's parade ground. Anybody can learn that. My grandmother can learn that. He wiped his mouth. Weapons. They went to weapons. And that was where it stopped being funny and started being frightening. Because when Emily Carter picked up a rifle, something happened in that room that 150 men felt in their spines before their brains caught up. She didn't hold it like a soldier. Every man in there had been trained. They knew what trained looked like. Trained is a series of correct decisions made quickly. This wasn't that. There were no decisions. Her hands went where they went, the way your hand goes to your own face in the dark. She stripped the weaponry and rebuilt it while looking at Ryan instead of the parts, not as a show, not as a stunt. She simply didn't need to look, and it never occurred to her to pretend she did. A staff sergeant named Doyle, 20-year man, hard as a fence post, said out loud, "What the hell?" Ryan snapped Doyle. "Sorry, Sergeant." Doyle didn't sound sorry. Doyle sounded like a man watching a magic trick and he just realized wasn't a trick. Emily set the rifle down and stepped back. Time, she asked. Nobody answered. Nobody had started a clock. That was the thing. Nobody had started a clock because nobody had believed there would be anything to time. "Sergeant," Emily said, "what's next on your list?" Ryan looked at his own hands. And here's what nobody in that hall knew, what nobody could have known. Ryan Mitchell was at that exact moment doing math. 12 years of math. He was standing in his own training hall running the numbers on what he had just seen, and the numbers weren't coming out, and the not coming out was doing something to him that no enemy had ever managed. There are exactly 3 kinds of people who move like that. Ryan had met one of them once, 8 years ago, overseas. Guys with no patches and no last names who came through a forward base for 11 hours and left. And every hard man Ryan knew got quiet when they walked past. He had spent 8 years telling himself they were overrated. "Medical," he said. His voice came out wrong. He heard it come out wrong. He hoped nobody else did. They all did. They ran the medical block. Emergency trauma protocols. Ryan called scenarios ugly ones, the kind he used to break new corpsmen, and Emily answered them before he finished describing them. Then she started correcting him, politely, which was so much worse. "Sergeant, that protocol was updated. That's the old sequence." "That's the sequence in the manual." "That's the sequence in the manual you have," Emily said. "It's not the sequence being used." "And how would you know that?" Emily looked at him. She didn't answer. She just looked at him. And Sergeant Ryan Mitchell, in front of 150 men in the hall, he had called his house, understood that she wasn't refusing to answer because she was hiding. She was refusing to answer because she couldn't. Colonel Hayes turned and walked out of the room. Nobody saw him go except Emily. And Noah Bennett, who was watching everything now, who had stopped being a private in the 3rd row and become a witness, and who would remember this day until he was an old man telling his grandchildren about it. Hayes went straight to his office and closed the door and stood there for a moment with his hand still on the knob. Then he sat down at his terminal. He didn't want to do it. That was the strange part. Some old animal part of him didn't want to know, because there are questions you can't unask. He typed a request into a system that most officers on that base didn't know existed. Then he waited. Back in the hall, Ryan Mitchell was drowning and doing what drowning men do. Grabbing. "Land nav," he barked. "Full plot, no GPS. "Sergeant," Doyle said, "that's an hour block." "Then we'll be here an hour." "It's 1400, Sergeant. The hall's booked at—" "Then we'll be here an hour, Doyle." The silence after that was different from all the other silences. This one had pity in it. That was the moment Ryan lost the room. Not when she stripped the rifle. Not when she corrected the protocol. It was when he screamed at a 20-year staff sergeant over a scheduling conflict, and 150 men heard exactly what was underneath it. Fear. They'd never heard him afraid before. Emily plotted the course. It took her 11 minutes. The standard was 40. She handed the sheet to Ryan, and he stared at it, and his eyes went over the same 3 lines 4 times, and he couldn't make them mean anything because his hands were shaking. "This is wrong," he said. "It isn't. This route doesn't exist." "It exists. It's not on your map." Emily's voice was gentle now, and gentle was the cruelest thing she could possibly have done to him, and she knew it, and she did it anyway because the room needed to see it. "Sergeant, your map is 4 years old. That's not your fault, but it's somebody's." Ryan looked up, and for one raw, naked second, everything came off his face. The swagger, the contempt, all of it. And what was underneath was a 34-year-old man who had built his entire identity out of being the hardest man in the room, standing in a room where he wasn't even close. "Who are you?" he said. It wasn't a challenge. It came out almost like a plea. "Nobody becomes this skilled without a reason," he said louder, grabbing for the swagger again, dragging it back on like a coat. "Nobody. So either you're lying about what you are or somebody's lying for you, and either way, I want a name, right now, in front of these men. Give me a name." Emily said, "You don't have the clearance." The room detonated, not with noise, with something worse. With 150 men all thinking the same thought at the same moment, and the thought was, "Oh no." Ryan took a step forward. "You don't get to say that to me." "I just did. In my hall." "Sergeant?" Emily didn't move an inch. "Stop. I'm telling you as a courtesy. Stop right now." "Or what?" And Captain Emily Carter, 34 years old, 5'4", in a plain gray shirt with nothing on the collar, looked up at a man 8 inches taller and 90 pounds heavier, and said the sentence that 150 men would repeat for the rest of their careers. "Or in about 90 seconds, a criminal is going to walk through that door, and you're going to find out that you were never fighting a woman." Ryan laughed. Nobody laughed with him. He looked around, and for the first time in 12 years, he was alone in his own hall. Doyle wouldn't look at him. The front row wouldn't look at him. Noah Bennett was looking right at him, and that was the worst of all because there was no triumph in that kid's face. There was pity. A 22-year-old private was standing there feeling sorry for him. 90 seconds, Ryan said. "That's what you've got. A threat." "That wasn't a threat, Sergeant. That was a favor." "Why would you do me a favor?" Emily looked at him for a long moment. "Because you've got 3 combat rotations," she said quietly. "Because your last one ended early and you've never told anybody in this room why, and I think that's the only true thing about you. And because somewhere under all of this, there's a soldier. I've read your phone, all of it, the parts your colonel can't see." Ryan went absolutely white. "That's not possible." "I know it isn't," Emily said. And yet, down the hall a door opened. Boots. Fast, not a walk, not quite a run. The specific terrible rhythm of a very senior officer moving faster than a very senior officer is ever supposed to move. Ryan turned toward the sound. Every man in the hall turned toward the sound. Colonel Michael Hayes came through the doorway with a tablet in his hand and his face the color of paper. He stopped. He looked at the woman in the gray shirt. And Colonel Michael Hayes, 58 years old, 2 wars. A chest full of ribbons he never wore came to attention like a plebe. His voice cracked in the middle of it. "Ma'am, I need to know if you want this room cleared." 150 men stopped breathing at once, and Sergeant Ryan Mitchell heard very distinctly the sound of his own life ending. Colonel Michael Hayes stood at attention in the middle of his own training hall and waited for a woman with no rank on her collar to answer him. Nobody moved. "Sir," Ryan said. "Sir, what are you doing?" Hayes didn't look at him. Ma'am, I asked you a question. Do you want this room cleared? Emily Carter looked around the hall. 150 faces. Some of them were staring at her now with a kind of dawning horror. Some were staring at Ryan. Doyle, the 20-year staff sergeant, had gone the color of concrete. No, Colonel, she said. I want them exactly where they are. Ma'am, I'd strongly recommend, I know you would. Emily's voice stayed level. Recommendation noted. They stay. Hayes swallowed. It was audible. 58 years old, 2 wars, and 150 of his soldiers watched him swallow. Yes, ma'am. 1422. That was the exact time. Doyle remembered it for the rest of his life because he glanced at the clock on the wall. Right then, some stupid animal instinct telling him this is a thing you're going to want to place, and the second hand was just coming up on the 4. Ryan Mitchell was still standing in the middle of the floor with his hands half raised, like a man who'd walked into a room and forgotten why. Sir, he said again. Sir, with respect, whatever's on that tablet, I need to see it. No, you don't. Sir, this is my hall. Sergeant Mitchell. Hayes finally turned and his voice did something none of them had heard in 6 years of his command. It shook. If you say the words my hall one more time in the next 10 minutes, I will have you removed from this building by force, and I will do it in front of every man standing here. Do you understand me? Silence. I said, do you understand me? Yes, sir. Say it. I understand, sir. Ryan's face was burning. Not red, burning. There is a particular kind of shame that lives in a man who has never once been corrected in public, and it doesn't feel like shame. It feels like rage, and it comes out of the same hole, and that is the entire problem with men like Ryan Mitchell. Emily saw it. She saw exactly what was happening in his chest because she'd seen it in 100 men in a dozen countries, and she could read it the way other people read a road sign. He was not going to fold. He was going to double. Good, she thought. Let him. Colonel, she said, Sergeant Mitchell proposed a full evaluation. I accepted. We're 4 blocks in. I'd like to finish. Hayes stared at her. Ma'am. Yes, Colonel. You want to finish? That's correct. Ma'am, He stopped, restarted. His hands were behind his back now, and his knuckles were white. May I speak to you privately for 30 seconds? No. The word landed like a dropped plate. Anything you want to say to me, Colonel, you can say in front of these men. That's actually the point. That's been the point since 1405. Emily's chin came up half an inch. You've had a problem in this building for 4 years, and you've solved it privately, every single time. How's that working? Hayes didn't answer. He couldn't. And 150 men watched their commander stand there with nothing to say, and every one of them understood in that second that this had never been about Ryan Mitchell at all. Ryan understood it too. That was the terrible part. He wasn't stupid. That was the tragedy of him. He had never once been stupid. He looked at his colonel and he saw a man who had known, who had always known, who had walked past that hall 3 times a week for 4 years and heard the laughter through the door and kept walking. Something in Ryan's face changed. You knew, he said. Sergeant, you knew. Louder. You've been signing off on my numbers for 4 years, sir. 4 years of the best pass rates on this base. My guys, my program. And now there's a woman in a gray shirt and suddenly I'm... Sergeant, stand down. No, sir. Ryan's voice cracked wide open. No, sir, I don't think I will because I'd like the record to show that 10 minutes ago I was the best instructor at Fort Liberty. And now I'm apparently a war criminal, and nobody in this room will tell me what changed. And Emily Carter said quietly, I'll tell you what changed. Everyone turned. Nothing, she said. Nothing changed. That's what's killing you. You're exactly the same man you were at 1405. The only thing that changed is that somebody in this room finally has the authority to say it out loud. Ryan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. 1424. Land nav's done, Emily said. You have 4 blocks left on your own list, Sergeant. Comms breach, interrogation resistance, and the last one, whatever it is, the one you've been saving. She rolled her cuff another fold. Or we can stop. Your call, genuinely. Right now in front of everybody, you can say the word and I will walk out that door and you will never see me again. It was a gift. That's what nobody understood, not then, not for years. She was handing him a door and holding it open and standing back from it. Ryan looked at the door. Then he looked at the 150 men, and he chose wrong. Of course he did. He'd been choosing wrong for 12 years, and the machinery was too heavy to stop now. Comms, he said. Somebody in the back row said, "Oh, come on," out loud, and didn't even bother to hide it. And Ryan didn't turn around because he was afraid of what he'd see. They ran comms. It took 9 minutes, and it was the worst 9 minutes of Ryan Mitchell's professional life. He gave her a scenario: degraded net hostile jamming 3 call signs down extract in 14 minutes. It was a nasty problem. He'd used it for years to break sergeants. Guys with 10 years in had cracked on it and had to go sit down. Emily solved it in 90 seconds. Then she said, "Sergeant, your scenario has an error." "It doesn't have an error. Your jamming profile's wrong. Nobody uses that band anymore. They stopped in 2021 because we started geolocating off it." She said it the way you'd tell somebody their headlight was out. Whoever wrote this scenario was working off a threat assessment that's 5 years old. You're training these men to counter a technique that doesn't exist. Doyle said, "Jesus, Doyle." "Sergeant, she's right." Doyle turned his head slowly. "She's right, and you know she's right, and I've been telling you that block was stale for 2 years. And that right there was the second thing that broke, not Ryan, Doyle. Because when a 20-year staff sergeant finally opens his mouth after 2 years of silence, it means the room has already decided and everybody in it can feel the decision, and there is no coming back from that. Ryan turned on him. "You've been telling me." "Yes, Sergeant." "When?" "Every quarter, in writing. You want the dates?" Doyle's voice was flat and tired and about 100 years old. "March, June, September. You wrote noted on all 3. Doyle, "I've got copies, Sergeant." 1431. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody had laughed in 25 minutes. The men who'd been howling at 14:05 were now standing at rigid attention, staring at a spot on the far wall, and every one of them was doing the same math in his head, and the math was, how many times did I laugh and who saw me? Emily watched it happen. This was the part of her job that nobody ever believed. She wasn't there to embarrass anyone. She was there to watch what a room does when the fear comes off. And what this room was doing was waking up all at once like a limb who I've been sitting on. "Sergeant," she said, "breach." "What breach? It's on your list. Let's go." "I didn't. You said the whole list." Emily's tone never moved. "You said it in front of 150 men and a full colonel. Do you want to unsay it?" And Ryan Mitchell, drowning, went for the only thing he had left. He went ugly. "You want breach?" He walked to the wall rack, pulled the training frame down, and let it hit the floor with a bang that made half the room jump. "Fine, let's do breach, but we're not doing the block. We're doing it my way." "Sergeant Mitchell." Hayes stepped forward. "No." "Sir," she asked. "I said no." "Colonel," Emily said, "let him." "Ma'am, that frame is rigged for a 2-man stack, and he knows it." "I know he knows it." Emily was already moving. "That's why I want to see it." Hayes stared at her, and something crossed his face that wasn't fear anymore and wasn't confusion. It was something closer to grief. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "please don't do this in front of my men." Emily stopped. She looked at him, and she said very softly so only he could hear it, "Colonel, they're not your men. Not right now. Right now, they belong to him. That's the whole problem, and I can't fix it in your office." Hayes closed his eyes for a second. Then he stepped back. 1434. She ran the breach. 2-man frame. 1 person. Ryan called the clock, and he called it fast, and he called it dirty, cutting the count, jumping the sequence, doing every cheap trick an instructor knows to make a soldier fail so he can say the failure was theirs. She didn't fail. She reconfigured the frame mid-motion, took a load path that shouldn't have worked, that no manual on that base contained. That made Doyle actually take 1 step forward with his hand half out like a man watching somebody walk onto ice. The frame gave, clean, 11 seconds. The standard with 2 men was 19. And Ryan Mitchell stood there holding a stopwatch he had never actually started because he'd been so sure, and he looked down at it, and the little digital zeros looked back up at him, and something in him just quietly came apart. "Time," Emily said. He didn't answer. "Sergeant, time." "I didn't start it." The room heard it. "Say again." "I said I didn't start it." His voice was almost gone. "I didn't start the clock." Emily nodded slowly. "Why not?" And Ryan Mitchell said the truest sentence he had said in 12 years. "Because I didn't think you'd need one." Nobody moved. Somewhere in the third row, Noah Bennett realized his hands were shaking, and he had no idea when that had started. Emily set the frame down. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She walked back to the center of the floor and stood in front of the man who had put his hands on her at 14:05, and she said, "Sergeant Mitchell, look at me." He looked. "You are not a bad soldier." The room made a noise. I want that on the record in front of everyone, because in about 20 minutes it's going to be very hard for anyone in this building to believe it, including you. Emily's voice was steady as a heartbeat. Your drill is clean. Your instincts are sound. You read that frame in about half a second, and you knew what I was going to do before I did it, and there are maybe 40 men in the United States Army who could have called it that fast. I saw you see it. Ryan's eyes were wet. He would have died before admitting it. So here's the question I actually came to Fort Liberty to answer, Emily said. Not can you fight, you can fight. The question is, what happened to you? Nothing happened to me. Your third rotation ended 11 weeks early. Ma'am, Hayes started. Colonel, stay out of this. Ma'am, that's a sealed. I know what it is. Emily didn't take her eyes off Ryan. Sergeant, I'm going to ask you one question and you can lie to me, and I'll let you, and we'll move on and finish your list, and I'll write my report, and this will all be over by 1700. Or you can answer it. Ryan's jaw was locked so tight the muscle was jumping. Ask it, he said. How many did you lose? The hall stopped breathing. 1439. That's not, Ryan's voice broke in half. He grabbed it back. That's not relevant. How many? Ma'am, that's not. How many, Sergeant? 4. The word came out of him like something being pulled. 4, Emily said. 4. He was staring at the floor now. 12 years of granite, and it took one question. 4 guys, and before you ask, no, it wasn't my call, and yes, it was my call, and both of those are true. And if you've read my file, you already know that. I have, Emily said. I do. Then why are you asking? Because they don't. She gestured at the hall without looking away from him. 150 men in this room, Sergeant, and not one of them knows. 12 years and you never told a soul. You just came back and started making people afraid of you, and you called it training. Ryan's shoulders came up. Don't. You built a whole religion out of it. Fear creates discipline. Fear keeps them alive. Fear means they'll do what you say when it counts, and if they'd done what you said, maybe don't. It came out of him like a shotgun. The whole room jumped. Hayes moved half a step, and Emily Carter didn't move at all. Maybe those 4 would still be here, she finished gently. Ryan Mitchell put his hands on his knees. 150 men watched the hardest man at Fort Liberty stand in the middle of the floor and try to breathe. You don't know anything about it, he said. I know they were 19, 22, 26, and 31, Emily said. I know the 22-year-old's name was Bennett. Noah Bennett's head snapped up so fast his neck cracked. The room went absolutely silent. Doyle turned. Half the front row turned. 150 pairs of eyes went from the woman in the gray shirt to the 22-year-old private in the third row and back again, and the arithmetic hit that room like weather. Ryan straightened up very slowly. What did you say? Emily didn't repeat it. Ryan turned. His whole body turned mechanical joint by joint until he was looking at Noah. Bennett, he said, Sergeant. Your first name? Noah Sergeant. Your father's name? Noah's voice came out of somewhere very far away. Daniel Bennett, Sergeant. 1443. Ryan Mitchell stood there in the middle of his training hall and looked at the kid he'd been screaming at for 4 months, and the sound he made was not a word. You knew, he said. His head turned back toward Emily. You knew when you walked in that door. Yes. You knew before you walked in that door. Yes. He's been in my hall for 4 months. 16 weeks, Emily said. You put him on report twice. You made him run the hill in the rain in week 3 because he asked a question. And this afternoon, when 149 men decided it was smarter to keep their mouths shut, he was the only one who stood up for a stranger. Ryan couldn't look at the kid. He physically could not do it. Sergeant, Noah said, don't. Sergeant, did you know my father? And there it was, the question the whole room was holding. Ryan Mitchell's face did something that made grown men look away. Yeah, he said. Yeah, Bennett, I knew your father. Noah's chin was going. He locked it down. 22 years old, and he locked it down like a professional. Nobody told me, emo, he said. Nobody ever told me anything. They said it was classified. My mom's been calling somebody at Bragg for 11 years and nobody ever, Bennett. Nobody ever said one word to us, Sergeant. Not one word, and you've been standing 4 feet from me for 16 weeks. Bennett, and you didn't say anything. The kid's voice tore, and Sergeant Ryan Mitchell, 12 years, 3 rotations, the hardest man at Fort Liberty, said I couldn't. Why not? Because I'm the reason. The hall went so quiet you could hear the ventilation. Emily Carter closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. That was the only crack anybody ever saw in her that whole day. 1 second, and then it was gone and she was steel again. That's not accurate, she said. Ma'am, that's not accurate, Sergeant, and you know it isn't, and you've known it for 11 years, and you've chosen the lie because the lie is easier to carry than the truth. Emily stepped toward him. You want to know why I have your file, not the one in this building, the other one. Ryan's head came up. Because I was on the review, she said. 1446, Colonel Hayes said, oh God. Ryan Mitchell's face went completely empty. You were on the review. I was on the review. You were, he stopped, started again. He was breathing like a man at altitude. Nobody was on that review. That review was 6 people and I never saw a single face and they were behind I know what they were behind, Sergeant. I asked you a question that day, Emily said quietly. Through the panel, you wouldn't remember my voice. I asked you why you moved your team at 11 minutes instead of waiting for the second element. Ryan Mitchell's mouth opened and nothing came out. And you said, Emily continued, because the intel was wrong and I could hear it in the traffic. And every other person on that panel wrote that down as a failure of discipline. She let it sit. I wrote it down as the correct call. The room did not make a sound. You were right, Emily said. Sergeant, listen to me. You were right. The intel was bad. The second element was 19 minutes out, not 4. And if you had waited, you would have lost 11 men instead of 4. And I have spent 11 years knowing that and not being able to tell you. Ryan's legs went. He caught himself. Barely. One hand on the frame. Don't, he said. Don't do that. I dissented, Emily said. It's in the file. My dissent is in the file, Sergeant, 4 pages, and it was sealed with everything else. And you were told the finding was inconclusive and sent home, and nobody ever said another word to you. Don't. And you came back here, and you decided that if you'd just been harder, if they'd just been more afraid of you, if you'd screamed a little louder, stop. And you have spent 11 years punishing every kid who walks through that door for a decision that was correct. Ryan Mitchell put his hand over his face. 150 men watched it happen. Nobody laughed. Nobody breathed. And Noah Bennett, 22 years old, 4 months out of basic, walked out of the 3rd row. Doyle said, Bennett, and put a hand out, and Noah went right past it. He stopped in front of Ryan Mitchell. Sergeant, Bennett, get back in line. Sergeant, look at me. Get back in line, Private. Sergeant, Ryan's hand came down, and a 22-year-old kid looked up at the man he'd been terrified of for 16 weeks and said, was he scared? Ryan Mitchell made a sound like he'd been hit. What? My dad, at the end. Was he scared? Noah's face was wrecked and his voice was steady, and it was the single bravest thing that happened in that building that day. That's all. That's all I've ever wanted to know. 11 years, Sergeant. Just tell me that one thing and I'll get back in line and I'll never ask you again. 1451. Ryan Mitchell looked at that kid for a long, long time. No, he said. Noah's mouth trembled. No, he wasn't scared. Ryan's voice was in pieces and he kept going anyway. He was laughing, Bennett. 90 seconds before he was laughing at me because I'd said something stupid about my ex-wife, and he had this thing he did. He'd go, Mitch, buddy, that's why you're single. And Ryan stopped. He physically could not continue. Doyle looked at the ceiling. 2 men in the front row were openly crying. 150 American soldiers stood in a training hall at Fort Liberty and watched a man they had been afraid of for 4 years come apart in front of a private. He wasn't scared, Ryan said. He never got scared. Not once. That's why he couldn't say it. That's why you're like this, Noah said. And Ryan Mitchell looked at him and nodded, just once. Yeah, he said. Emily Carter let that sit for 3 full seconds. Then she said, Sergeant Mitchell. He turned. That's the last block on your list. Ma'am. You said interrogation, resistance, guaseo. Her voice was almost kind, and it was the worst thing in the world. You just failed it. Somebody in the back made a sound like they'd been punched. Ma'am, Hayes started. No, Colonel, he needs to hear this. Emily stepped forward. Sergeant, every single thing I just did to you, I did with information. I didn't touch you. I never raised my voice. I have been in this building for 47 minutes, and I took you apart in front of 150 men, using nothing but things you had already told other people and things you thought were buried. Ryan stared at her. Do you understand what I'm telling you? No, ma'am. Then listen very carefully. Emily turned and she wasn't talking to Ryan anymore. She was talking to the room. Everything I used today is in a system, your file, your rotations, your losses, the names of the men you lost, the names of their children, whether you talk about it, whether you drink, which staff sergeant has been filing complaints, you keep marking noted. Doyle went white. Every one of you has a version of that, Emily said, and so does every man who wears this uniform. And I'm going to tell you something now that you are not going to like. 1454. I'm not the only one who can read it. The hall went dead. Hayes's head came up very slowly. Ma'am, he said, what did you just say? Emily didn't answer him. Sergeant Mitchell, she said, why did you throw my clipboard? Ryan blinked. What? At 14:05. You didn't check my ID? You didn't call the front desk? You didn't ask my name? You saw a small woman in a gray shirt with no name tape standing inside a restricted training facility, and your entire security response was to insult her and put your hands on her. Emily's voice hardened for the first time all afternoon, and it was like watching a door close. Sergeant, ask yourself the question. Ryan's face changed, slowly. How did you get in the building? He said. There it is. How did you get in the building? Emily said nothing. Ma'am. Ryan took a step forward, and for the first time in 50 minutes, he wasn't a bully. He was a soldier. His whole posture changed. Doyle saw it and felt the hair on his arms stand up. Ma'am, that's a badge door. That's a two-factor door. There's a desk, there's a roster, Yes. So how did you get in the building? I walked, Emily said. Hayes said, ma'am. Colonel, be quiet. She still hadn't looked away from Ryan. Sergeant, how long have I been on this base? Since 1400. No, Ryan's mouth went dry. Since when, he said. Emily said Tuesday. 1456. Somebody dropped something. A pen, maybe. It sounded like a gunshot. That's 3 days, Ryan said. That's 3 days. That's not... Ryan turned and looked at his colonel, and Colonel Michael Hayes was standing there with his eyes shut. Sir, is that possible? Hayes didn't answer. Sir, is that possible? Sergeant, Hayes said without opening his eyes, in the last 4 minutes, I've learned that it's been possible for 6 years. The hall erupted, not shouting. Something worse, 150 men all talking at once, low, fast, the sound of an organism realizing it's been sick. Emily let it run for exactly 4 seconds. Enough. It stopped. She hadn't even raised her voice and it stopped. And every man in that room felt the difference between what Ryan Mitchell had and what she had, and it was the most educational 4 seconds of their careers. I've been in the motor pool, Emily said. I've been in the chow hall. I sat in the back of a briefing on Wednesday for 40 minutes and took notes. I've been in this building twice before today. Nobody asked me a single question. Not one. In 3 days. That's not possible, Doyle said. Staff Sergeant, I stood 4 feet behind you Tuesday at 15:20, and you told a corporal named Rivas that his sister's paperwork was going to be fine. Emily's eyes came to him. You were kind to him. That's the only reason I remember it. Doyle sat down, right there, on the floor. Nobody asked me anything, Emily said, because I'm 5'4" and I'm quiet and I don't look like a threat. Sergeant Mitchell put his hands on me at 14:05, and it never once occurred to him to ask for my ID because in his head, there were only 2 categories of people who can hurt him and people who don't matter. Ryan's face was gray. And that, Emily said, is the actual finding. That's what I came here to write. Not that you're cruel, Sergeant. Cruel I can fix. Cruel is a training problem. She looked around the hall at all of them one by one. What I can't fix is a base where 150 trained American soldiers watched an unidentified person walk into a restricted facility and their only reaction was to laugh at her. Nobody breathed. You didn't fail because you were mean, Emily said. You failed because you were mean instead of alert, because he made you all so afraid of being the one who spoke up that when an actual unknown walked through an actual door, not one of you did your actual job. 1458. One of you did, she said, and she turned and looked at Noah Bennett. One of you opened his mouth. 16 weeks in the army, no rank, nothing to gain, everything to lose. He didn't know who I was either, gentlemen. He didn't do it because he saw a captain. He did it because he saw a person. Noah stood there and did not know what to do with his hands. And the man who taught him that, Emily said, died 11 years ago in a place none of you can find on a map, and he was laughing. Ryan Mitchell put both hands over his face and did not take them down. Emily turned back to Colonel Hayes. Colonel? Ma'am? Now you can clear the room. Hayes opened his mouth, and that was when the tablet in his hand chimed. He looked down at it. His face changed, not the way it had changed at 1422, not shock, something else, something worse. And every man in that hall watched a full colonel read 4 lines of text and go absolutely still. Ma'am, he said. Colonel, ma'am, this is a priority one. His voice had gone completely flat. It's addressed to you, on my system, through my authentication. Emily's head came up. Read it. Ma'am, there are 150. Read it, Colonel. Hayes looked at the screen. Then he looked at her, and for the first time that afternoon, Colonel Michael Hayes looked frightened. It says, he read, Phantom, do not leave the base, it's already inside. Emily Carter crossed the floor in 4 steps and took the tablet out of Colonel Hayes' hands. She didn't ask. 1459. Doors, she said. Ma'am, Colonel Doors, now, nobody in, nobody out, not a soul. Hayes turned toward the hall. Doyle. Doyle was already up off the floor. 20 years of muscle memory does that. Sir, both exits, 2 men each. Nobody leaves this building. Sir, on whose? On mine staff sergeant, and if that's not enough, on hers, and if that's not enough, you can shoot me a memo about it in the morning. Move. Doyle moved. Ryan Mitchell was still standing in the middle of the floor, with his hands half down from his face, and his eyes had gone somewhere else entirely. Not the shame anymore. Something older. Something that had been asleep for 11 years and had just heard its name called. Ma'am, he said. Emily didn't look up from the tablet. Ma'am, that message came through the colonel's authentication. I know. That means somebody used his credentials. I know. Ma'am, that means... Sergeant. Emily's thumb was moving across the screen fast. I understand exactly what it means. Stand by. Ryan stood by. And that more than anything else in that room told the 150 men how much the world had just tilted. Sergeant Ryan Mitchell had never stood by for anything in his life, and he did it now without a word because some part of him that predated all the swagger had recognized a voice worth obeying. Hayes said quietly, Ma'am, I need to ask something and I need a straight answer. Ask. Who sent that? Emily read the screen for another second. Then she said, Nobody. Ma'am. Colonel, that message didn't come from outside. She turned the tablet around. Look at the header. Look at the road. Do you see an origin? Hayes looked. His mouth opened. There's no origin. There's no origin, Emily said. Because it never left the building. 1500, the hall made a sound. Somebody in this building, Barretta, Emily said, sent me a priority 1 warning through a full colonel's credentials from inside our own network and had the presence of mind to strip the header before it went out. That's, Hayes' voice failed. He tried again. Ma'am, that takes access training in about 90 seconds, Emily said. And the only reason to strip the header is if they're afraid of who's watching them send it. She handed the tablet back. Colonel, how many people on this base have your authentication? Nobody has my authentication. Colonel, Hayes closed his eyes. My aide, he said, for scheduling. And the S6 shop has a maintenance credential that shadows mine when they push updates. How many people in S6? 9? Names. Ma'am, I'd have to. Then get them. Emily's voice was flat as pavement. Now. Hayes turned and started toward the door, and Emily said, Colonel. He stopped. Not on that tablet. Hayes looked down at the thing in his hand like it had turned into a snake. Ma'am, he said slowly, how long have they been in my system? Colonel, if I answer that honestly, you're not going to be able to walk. Answer it honestly. Emily looked at him. At least 4 months, she said. That's what I could confirm from a laptop in a motel outside Fayetteville before I ever set foot on this base. That's why I'm here. The leadership evaluation is real. It's also cover. Hayes reached out and put one hand on the wall. 4 months. At least. 4 months, Hayes said again, and it wasn't a question anymore. It was a man saying a word to see if it would hurt less the second time. It didn't. 15:02, Ryan Mitchell said, "Ma'am." "Sergeant, permission to speak freely." And Emily Carter turned and looked at him, and something crossed her face that was almost a smile. "Sergeant Mitchell," she said, "you threw my paperwork at a wall 57 minutes ago. I don't think you've ever spoken any other way." Somebody in the back row laughed. One short bark, and then he clapped a hand over his own mouth, horrified because it was the first laugh in the room since 14:05, and it had come out of nowhere and it had been real. Ryan didn't smile. "Ma'am, if somebody's in the network, what are they after?" "Wrong question." "Ma'am." "You're asking what?" "Ask who." Emily started walking slow down the front of the room, looking at faces. "Sergeant, in 12 years, how many times has a foreign service tried to steal a weapon off an American base?" "I don't know, ma'am." "Almost never. Do you know why?" "No, ma'am." "Because weapons are hard and people are easy." She kept walking. "Nobody wants your rifles. Your rifles are in a rack with a lock and a log and a camera. You know what isn't?" Nobody answered. "The kid who's 4 months in and just found out his father died in a way nobody will explain to him," Emily said. Noah Bennett's head came up. The hall went ice cold. "The staff sergeant who's filed 3 complaints and watched all 3 get marked noted," Emily said. Doyle from the doorway said, "Ma'am." The instructor who was told his finding was inconclusive and sent home to figure it out alone. Ryan Mitchell didn't move. "Every single person I just described," Emily said, "is a door. And every one of those doors was built in this room by this man over 4 years, while a colonel walked past it 3 times a week and kept walking because the pass rates were good." Hayes's hand was still on the wall. "Gentlemen," Emily said, "you want to know what I actually do for a living? I don't kick doors. I find them. And I have never in my career walked onto an American base and found this many in one hall." 15:04. "Ma'am," Ryan said, his voice had gone very rough, "are you telling me somebody's been recruiting my men?" "I'm telling you somebody's been reading them." "Reading them?" "Somebody has been sitting inside this base for 4 months building a list." Emily said, "The same list I built. Same names, same order. And Sergeant, here's the part I need you to hear, because you're the only one in this room who's going to understand it fast enough to matter." Ryan waited. "Number 1 on my list," Emily said. "Who said was you?" The floor dropped out. "Ma'am." "Number 1, Emily repeated. "You are the single most recruitable human being at Fort Liberty, and you have been for 11 years. You've got 12 years in 3 rotations, an unresolved loss, a sealed review, a career that stalled a chain of command that hung you out, and a belief, a deep load-bearing belief, that the institution you serve does not care whether you live or die." Ryan's face. Nobody in that hall ever forgot Ryan Mitchell's face. "That's not a bug in you, Sergeant. That's a profile. That's the profile. There are people whose entire job is finding a man exactly like you, and they've been walking past you in the chow hall for 4 months. Ma'am, I would never." "I know you wouldn't." Emily's voice cut clean. "That's why you're standing here and not in a room in Virginia. I read your descent file, I read your rotations, and I made a judgment call at 11 weeks out that you were the most dangerous man on this base to leave alone and the most valuable one to leave in place." She let that land. "I've been wrong before. Tell me I'm not wrong now." The hall held its breath. Ryan Mitchell straightened up. All the way, for the first time in an hour. "You're not wrong, ma'am." "Good. Ma'am, what do you need?" And Emily Carter said, "Everything you've noticed and never reported." Ryan blinked. "Ma'am, 4 years in this hall, Sergeant. You know these men better than any human being alive. You know who's late, who's tired, who bought a truck he can't afford, who's been quiet since March." She stepped in close. "You've been building a threat picture for 4 years and calling it being an asshole. So give it to me." And that right there at 15:06 on a Thursday afternoon was the moment Sergeant Ryan Mitchell's life split in half. Because for 12 years, every single thing that made him hard had been treated like a defect, and a woman he'd put his hands on had just called it an asset. Rivas, he said. Doyle's head turned. Rivas. Itai Sono. Corporal Rivas. Ryan was talking fast now, and his voice had changed completely, and half the men in the room didn't recognize it because they'd never heard him talk without the edge on. Ma'am, Rivas's sister's got an immigration problem. He's been trying to fix it for 8 months. Doyle's been helping him with paperwork. Sergeant, that kid is clean, Doyle said. I know he's clean, Doyle, that's the point. Ryan turned back to Emily. Ma'am, that's a door, isn't it? That's exactly what you just said. A kid with a problem he can't solve and something he loves. Yes. Who's been helping him besides Doyle? And Doyle said very slowly, Warrant Officer Kessler. The hall stopped. 1507. Kessler, Emily said. Is 6, Doyle said. He's been walking Rivas's paperwork through for about, Doyle's face went the color of ash. About 4 months. Nobody moved. Doyle, Emily said, where is Kessler right now? Ma'am, I don't. Where is he? He was in the hall at 1400, said a voice from the second row. Every head turned. It was a specialist nobody had noticed all afternoon. 24 maybe, hands shaking. Say again, Emily said. Ma'am, he was in the hall at the 1400 when you walked in. The kid swallowed. He was standing right by the door, and he watched Sergeant Mitchell throw your clipboard, and then he left. He left. Yes, ma'am, right, Avon. I remember because he didn't laugh. The silence in that room had weight. He didn't laugh, Emily repeated. No, ma'am, everybody laughed. He didn't. He just watched, and then he walked out. Emily turned to Hayes. Colonel, Hayes was already moving. Ma'am, if Kessler sent that message, he did. Then he's on our side. No, Emily said. Hayes stopped. Colonel, think. Emily's voice went hard and fast. Somebody strips a header and sends a priority 1 to a name nobody on this base knows. Why, to warn you. To warn me about what? That there's a, Hayes stopped. Say it. That there's a penetration. Colonel, if you were the penetration, Emily said, and you'd been sitting inside this network for 4 months, and on Tuesday afternoon, a woman you'd never seen walked into the motor pool, and nobody stopped her. And on Wednesday, she sat in the back of your briefing and took notes, and this afternoon, she walked into a training hall and dismantled the hardest man on this base in 47 minutes without raising her voice. What would you do? Hayes didn't answer. You'd panic, Ryan said. Everybody looked at him. He'd panic, Ryan said again. Ma'am, he's been watching you for 3 days trying to figure out what you are, and this afternoon he found out. Keep going, Sergeant. And he can't run because running confirms it, and he can't stay because you're already inside. Ryan's jaw worked. So he sends you a message that makes him look like a friend. Why, to buy an hour. For what? And Ryan Mitchell's face went absolutely still. To finish, he said. 1510. Colonel, Emily said, move. Hayes went out the door at a dead run, and a full colonel running is a thing that changes a room permanently. Emily turned back to the hall. Nobody leaves, she said. Nobody calls. Nobody texts. Phones in a pile on the floor right now, every one of you, and I mean right now. 150 men reached for their pockets, and one man didn't. Emily saw it. Of course she saw it. She'd been watching for it since 1405. She'd been watching for it for 3 days. She had been standing in a chow hall in a motor pool, in the back of a briefing room, watching for exactly this, and there it was. 3rd row. Far left. A sergeant first class with 14 years in and a wedding ring he turned when he was nervous. He was turning it. Sergeant Kane, Ryan said. Emily's hand came up half an inch and Ryan stopped talking mid-syllable. Sergeant Kane, Emily said pleasantly. Your phone. Kane didn't move. Sergeant? Ma'am? His voice was okay. Almost okay. Ma'am, with respect, I'm not sure you have the authority to Kane. That was Doyle from the door, and Doyle's voice was somewhere none of them had ever heard it. Kane, buddy, put the phone down. Doyle, put it down, brother. And Sergeant First Class Kane started crying. The hall didn't understand, not for another 2 seconds. They watched a 14-year man stand in the 3rd row with his phone in his fist and tears running down his face, and nobody understood. And then Emily Carter said the sentence that made it all snap into place. How much do they have on you, Kane? Kane's whole body sagged. Ma'am, he said. Ma'am, it was one thing. It was one thing 4 years ago, and it wasn't even. Kane, stop, Emily said. Don't say it in here. Ma'am. Sergeant, listen to me very carefully. Emily was moving toward him, and her hands were open at her sides, and her voice had gone almost soft. Whatever they have, you're about to say it out loud in front of 150 men, and once you do that, I cannot help you. Right now, I can. Right now, this second, you are a man with a problem. In 4 more words, you are something else. Do you understand the difference? Kane was shaking. Give me the phone, Emily said. Ma'am, they said, Kane, they said if I ever, Kane, he gave her the phone. 1513. Emily looked at the screen for about 3 seconds. Then she looked up, and her face was the calmest thing in the building, and that was how every man there knew it was bad. Doyle, she said. Ma'am, how many exits does this base have? 6, ma'am. 4 are closed after 1800. How many aircraft on the pad? Doyle's mouth opened. Ma'am, there's a medevac bird and... He stopped. Ma'am, why are you asking about the... Because Kessler's not running for a gate, Emily said. The hall erupted. Quiet. One word. It stopped dead. Kane, look at me. Not the floor. Me. She held up the phone. This message came in at 1451. What were you told to do? Kane's voice was barely there. Confirm you were in the hall. And confirm how long. Did you send it? Kane closed his eyes. Kane, did you send it? Yes, ma'am. When? 1453. And Emily Carter said, then he's had 20 minutes. 1514. Sergeant Mitchell, Ryan snapped. Ma'am, how fast can you get to the S6 building? 4 minutes at a run, ma'am. 2 if I take a truck. Take a truck. Take Doyle. Take nobody else, and I mean nobody, because I don't know who else in this room is turning a wedding ring right now. Emily's eyes came up and swept the hall, and the 150 men felt it. You are not going in. You are not touching him. You are going to stand at that door, and you are going to make sure nobody walks out of it, and if he tries, you talk to him. Sergeant, are you hearing me? You talk. Ma'am, if he's got you talk. Ma'am. Ryan. First name, first time. The whole room felt it land. 12 years ago, you made the right call, and nobody ever told you. I'm telling you now, you have good instincts and a bad religion. So today, this one time, you're going to trust the instinct and leave the religion in this hall. You do not go in that door. You wait for me. Ryan Mitchell looked at her for one long second. Yes, ma'am. He went. Doyle went with him. And 148 men stood in a training hall with a woman in a gray shirt and no idea what was happening. Emily turned to Kane. Sit down. Ma'am, sit down on the floor, Sergeant, before you fall down. Nobody in this room is going to touch you. She looked around. Am I understood? Nobody touches him. He just handed me 20 minutes he didn't have to hand me, and there are men in this room who'd have kept quiet for another hour. Kane sat down and put his head in his hands. 1516. Bennett, Noah's head came up. Ma'am, come here. He came. You are going to hate me for this, Emily said quietly. Ma'am, I need you to do the hardest thing anybody's going to do today, and I'm asking you instead of ordering you because you get to say no. Ma'am, don't answer yet. Emily's voice dropped so only he could hear. There's a warrant officer on this base who has spent 4 months learning that your father died in a way nobody will explain to you. He knows your mother's been calling Bragg for 11 years. He knows nobody has ever called her back. Noah's face went white. He knows that, Bennett. That's his job. And I need you to understand something before I say the next part. Ma'am. He was going to come to you, Emily said. Not today, not this year. 2 years from now, when you've got a clearance worth having. He was going to be very kind to you. He was going to find your mother's file. He was going to be the first person in 11 years to tell you the truth about your father, and he was going to do it because he needed something, and by then you'd have loved him for it. Noah Bennett stood there and did not breathe. That's what this is, Emily said. That's what all of it is. It's not codes, and it's not weapons. It's a lonely kid and a kind man with a folder. Noah's voice came out cracked. Ma'am, what do you need me to do? I need you to stand at that door, Emily said, And if Warrant Officer Kessler comes through it, I need you to say hello to him. Ma'am, say hello. Be friendly. Ask him about your paperwork. Emily's eyes didn't move. Because you're the only person in this building he does not know we know about. And if he sees you smile, he'll believe he still has time. And if he believes he has time, he won't do the thing he's about to do. What's he about to do? Emily didn't answer. Ma'am, what's he about to do? 1518. Bennett, Emily said, when a source burns, they don't run. Running takes a country and a passport and 11 friends. Burning takes a lighter. Noah's mouth opened. He's got 4 months of a network on a machine in that building, Emily said, and about half of it is names, and about a third of those names are in this room, and if he gets 9 minutes alone with it, we will never know which third. Ma'am, then. Yes. Then Sergeant Mitchell's standing outside a door. Yes. And you told him not to go in. And Emily Carter said, I know exactly what I told him. Noah stared at her. Ma'am, he said slowly, you lied to him. No, Emily said, I gave him an order. And in about 90 seconds, he's going to have to decide whether he's the man who follows a bad order because he's scared or the man who breaks it because he heard something in the traffic. She finally looked at Noah. That's the exact decision he made 11 years ago, Bennett. The one that cost your father, the one they hung him for. Noah's eyes filled. You're making him do it again. I'm giving him the chance to find out he was right. The tablet in Emily's hand went off. She looked at it, and Captain Emily Carter, in front of 148 men, said one word under her breath that none of them had ever expected to hear from her. Then she was moving. Bennett, door, now everybody else on the floor faces down, and if a single one of you moves before a man in a uniform tells you to, I will personally end your career. Am I understood? Nobody argued. 148 American soldiers hit the deck. 15:19. Emily hit the exit at a run, and Noah Bennett was 3 steps behind her, and the thing that would haunt him, the thing he'd tell his grandchildren about 60 years later, was that she didn't look scared. She looked sad. Ma'am, he shouted. Ma'am, what's on the tablet? Emily didn't slow down. Mitchell went in, she said. The truck was still running outside the S6 building with the driver's door hanging open. Doyle was standing beside it with his hands on his head. Ma'am, his voice was in pieces. Ma'am, I couldn't stop him. He heard something. He said he heard something, and he went, and I couldn't. How long? 40 seconds. Weapon. He's not carrying, ma'am. We came out of a training hall, and Emily Carter was already gone. She went through that door, and she went through it fast and low, and what she found on the other side was Sergeant Ryan Mitchell, standing perfectly still, in the middle of a server room with both hands out and open talking. Just talking. And 9 feet away, a 51-year-old warrant officer named David Kessler was standing over a machine with a cable in one hand, and his other hand somewhere Emily couldn't see, and he was crying so hard he could barely stand. No, listen to me, buddy. That's not how this goes, Ryan was saying. His voice was the gentlest thing in the world. Dave, look at my hands. Look at them. I got nothing. I'm just a guy. 12 years and a bad attitude. That's all I am. Ryan, you don't understand. I understand better than anybody in this building. You don't. They got you 4 years ago, Ryan said. Something small, something stupid, something you'd have fixed in a week if you'd told one person and you didn't tell one person, and it's been eating you alive ever since. Kessler's face came apart. Dave, how do I know that? Ryan, sorry, Owen, how do I know that? Say it. I don't know. Because that's my life too, Ryan Mitchell said. Emily stopped in the doorway and did not move. 11 years, Dave. 11 years of something that ate me alive. And I never told one person, and today a woman I threw a clipboard at told me I was right the whole time. Ryan's voice broke. The whole time, Dave. 11 years of hating myself for being right. Kessler was shaking so hard the cable was rattling. They're not going to do that for you, Ryan said. Whoever's been kind to you for 4 months, Dave, they're not going to walk in here and tell you you were right. There's exactly one person in North Carolina who might, and she's standing behind me. Kessler's eyes came up, and he saw her. 15:21. Warrant Officer Kessler, Emily said. Don't come any closer. I'm not going to. His voice tore. You're Phantom. Yes. Then you know what happens to me. I know exactly what happens to you, Emily said. And I'm going to tell you right now out loud, and I'm not going to lie to you, because I think you've had 4 months of people being extremely kind to you, and I don't think you can survive one more. Kessler made a sound. It's bad, Emily said. It's very bad. You will not wear that uniform again. There's a room in Virginia, and you'll be in it for a long time, and people will ask you the same 11 questions for a year and a half. Ma'am, Ryan said. Sergeant, be quiet. Emily took one step. One point. Dave, here's the other part. You sent me that message. Kessler's face. You stripped the header and you sent a priority one to a name you weren't supposed to know at 14:51, 38 minutes ago, and you have been standing in this room for 20 minutes with a cable in your hand and you have not pulled it. Kessler was sobbing. 20 minutes, Dave. You could have done it in 9. Why didn't you? And Warrant Officer David Kessler, 51 years old, 29 years of service, said, because Bennett's on the list. The room went silent. The kid, Kessler said, the Bennett kid, they wanted him. They've wanted him since March, and I've been slow walking it for 4 months, and I'm out of reasons, and I couldn't. His hand came off the machine. I couldn't do it, ma'am. I couldn't. He's 22 and his mom still calls, and I couldn't. Emily Carter said very quietly, Dave, put the cable down. He put the cable down, and that was when Noah Bennett walked through the door behind her. Nobody in that room breathed. 15, 22. Emily Carter did not turn around. She didn't have to. She'd heard the door. She'd heard the boots. She'd known the exact weight of that kid's stride since Tuesday. Bennett, she said, stop where you are. Noah stopped. David Kessler looked at him, and a 51-year-old warrant officer with 29 years of service made a sound that no one in that building would ever get out of their head. Oh God, Kessler said. Oh God, kid, don't. Don't look at me. Noah Bennett didn't move. Sergeant Mitchell, Emily said quietly, hands stay where they are. Yes, ma'am. Dave, Emily said. Eyes on me, not him, me. Ma'am, I can't. Dave, I can't look at him. The sound bounced off every hard surface in that room. Ryan Mitchell didn't flinch. 12 years of learning exactly when a man is about to break, and he stood there with his palms out like he had all afternoon. Then don't, Ryan said. Don't look at him. Look at me. I'm ugly, but I'm familiar. Kessler laughed. It came out of him wrecked in involuntary half a sob, and it was the first crack in the wall. Emily saw it. Dave, how long have you known that kid's name, ma'am? How long? March, Kessler whispered. March 14th. Who gave it to you? Silence. Dave. Ma'am, if I'm saying the name in this room, then don't say the name, Emily said. I don't need the name. I'll have the name by Tuesday, whether you say it or not, and you know that, and they know that. That's not what I'm asking. Kessler's hands were shaking so hard he had to press them against the machine. Then what are you asking? And Emily Carter said, I'm asking why a man slow walks a tasking for 4 months and takes the hit for it every single week. Kessler's face came apart all over again. Because I read his file, he said. 1524. Noah Bennett's voice from the doorway, very small. My file. Bennett, don't talk, Emily said. Ma'am, he said Bennett, don't talk. Noah shut his mouth. Dave, Emily said, keep going. They sent me his file in March, Kessler said. The whole thing. Everything. And ma'am, I've done this. I've read a lot of files. That's what I am now. That's what I turned into. I read files and I find the crack and I write it down and I send it and I don't think about it because if you think about it, you can't do it. And I've been not thinking about it for 4 years. And I opened his and the first line was his mother. Ryan Mitchell closed his eyes. 11 years of phone calls, Kessler said. Somebody had logged them. Every single one. 11 years of a woman calling, bragging, getting a voicemail, and somebody typed it all up and put it in a folder and highlighted it, ma'am. They highlighted it like it was a good thing. Dave, it was a green highlight, Kessler said. A little green highlight, because that's what makes him recruitable. That's the crack. That's the thing they'd use. Noah Bennett made a noise behind them. Bennett, Emily said without turning, breathe. Ma'am, breathe private. They highlighted my mom. The room stopped. 1525. Kid, Kessler said. Don't. Noah's voice was tearing open. Don't call me kid. You've been calling me kid for 4 months in the hallway, and I thought you were nice. Bennett, Uscha, I thought you were the only guy on this base who was nice to me. Bennett, that was Emily, and it came out like a door slamming and it stopped him cold. That was the point. That was the entire point. That's what he was for. Noah's mouth was moving with no sound coming out. He was assigned to be nice to you, Emily said. Somebody sat in a room and decided that the most efficient way into this base was a lonely 22-year-old with a dead father and a mother nobody called back, and they picked a kind man to do it because kind is the tool. That's the job. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Noah Bennett stood in a doorway and understood. And then he said the thing that broke Ryan Mitchell. Then why didn't he do it? Nobody answered. Ma'am? Noah's voice cracked all the way down the middle. Ma'am, if that was the job, why didn't he do it? He's had 4 months. He could have walked up to me any day. He stopped because he'd heard what he was about to say. I'd have said, yeah, Noah said, to anything. If he'd told me what happened to my dad, I'd have said yes to anything. 15:26, Kessler was on his knees. Nobody had seen him go down. He was just down on the floor of his own server room with his hands over his face. Because I've got a son, he said. Emily's head came up. Dave, he's 26, he's in Ohio. He hasn't talked to me since 2019, and ma'am, I deserve that. I earned every day of it. Kessler's voice was gravel and water. And I opened that folder in March, and I saw a green highlight over a woman calling a phone number for 11 years, and I thought that's what I did. That's what I did to mine. And I've been finding the crack in people for 4 years and telling myself it doesn't matter because nobody's real. And then somebody handed me a real one. Nobody in that room said a word. So I slow walked it, Kessler said. I said the kid wasn't cleared yet. I said the timing was bad. I said his unit was hot. I lied about a boy for 4 months to people who kill people for lying, and today I ran out of lies. Emily Carter took one step forward. Dave, look at me. He looked up. You just made the second hardest decision anybody's made in this building today, she said. Ma'am. And the hardest one was made by that kid at 1408 when he opened his mouth for a stranger, and neither one of you is going to get a medal for it, and I want you both to hear me say that out loud. Emily's voice was iron. Nobody's coming. Nobody's going to write this down and read it at a ceremony. This afternoon does not exist. Kessler laughed again, that same wrecked sound. Story of my life, ma'am. Then let me change the ending. 15:28. Doyle came through the door. He came in slow, and he came in with his hands empty, and he stopped when Emily's eyes hit him. Ma'am, the colonel's outside with 4 MPs, and he wants to know. He waits. Ma'am, he's a full staff sergeant. He waits. Doyle looked at Kessler on the floor, and Doyle's face did something complicated. Dave, he said. Kessler didn't look up. Dave, buddy, it's Doyle. I know who it is. Dave, you helped me with Revis's paperwork. You sat in my truck for 2 hours in the rain in November explaining immigration law to me, and you didn't have to do that. You bought me a Coke. Doyle's voice went. Dave, look at me. You bought me a Coke. Kessler put his forehead on the floor. Doyle, Emily said quietly, that's enough. Ma'am, I've known this man for 6 years. I know. 6 years, ma'am, and I. Doyle stopped, restarted, 20-year staff sergeant, and he couldn't get it out. Ma'am, was any of it real law? And Emily Carter said, all of it, and Doyle turned. That's the part nobody ever gets, Emily said. That's the thing I've been trying to say in that training hall for an hour. It's all real. He really did sit in your truck. He really did explain the paperwork. He really did buy you a Coke staff sergeant, and he meant it, and he was also sending a report in about you every 3rd Thursday. And both of those things are true at the same time, and that's why it works. Doyle's hands were shaking. That's why it always works, Emily said. Nobody gets recruited by a villain. Nobody's ever been recruited by a villain in the history of the world. You get recruited by a friend. 15:30, Ryan Mitchell said, ma'am. Sergeant, what was in my folder? The room went very still. Emily turned and looked at him. Sergeant, don't. Ma'am, you said I was number 1 on your list. I did. So they had a folder on me, too. Emily didn't answer. Ma'am, Ryan's voice was steady, completely steady. It was the steadiest thing in that room. I've had a rough hour. I threw a captain's clipboard at a wall. I found out I was right about the worst day of my life, and I just watched a friend of mine go down on his knees. So I'd like one straight answer before the MPS come through that door, and this all belongs to somebody else. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Dave, she said, did they have a folder on Mitchell? Kessler nodded into the floor. What was highlighted, Kessler said everything. Ryan Mitchell absorbed that. Ma'am, Sergeant, I told you at 1450, you were the most recruitable man on this base. Then why didn't they come for me? And David Kessler lifted his head off the floor and said, they did. 1532. Ryan Mitchell's face did not move. Say again. They came for you in June, Kessler said, 2023. That's not the guy from the VA, Kessler said. The counselor, the one who called you 4 times. Ryan Mitchell went absolutely white. Ryan, Kessler said, you never called him back. Nobody in that room breathed. You never called him back, Kessler said. And I have spent 3 years watching them try to figure out how to get to a man who won't pick up his phone and ma'am, listen. That's the whole reason he's still standing here. Not honor, not loyalty. He's just the most unreachable son of a bitch on this base, and it saved his life. Ryan Mitchell put his hand on the doorframe. 4 calls, he said. 4. I remember those calls. I know you do. I remember standing in my kitchen at 11 at night looking at that phone, Ryan said, and his voice was not working right. And I remember thinking, if I call this guy back, I'm going to have to say it out loud. And I couldn't say it out loud, so I didn't call, and I've hated myself for that for 3 years. Sergeant, Emily said, 3 years of thinking I was too much of a coward to get help. Sergeant Mitchell, and you're telling me that's the reason I'm not in a room in Virginia? Yes, Emily said. Ryan Mitchell laughed. It was the worst laugh any of them ever heard. That's not honor, he said. Ma'am, that's just being broken in a way that happened to be useful. And Emily Carter said, Sergeant, that is the single truest sentence anyone has said in this building today, and I want you to hold on to it because in about 4 minutes, people are going to start telling you that you're a hero, and you're going to have to decide whether to believe them. 1534. Colonel Michael Hayes came through the door. He'd waited. 6 minutes he'd waited, a full colonel on his own base, standing outside a door because a woman with no rank on her collar told him to. He came in and he saw Kessler on the floor, and he stopped dead. Dave, he said. Kessler said, hi, Mike. And that was the thing that finished Colonel Hayes, not the 4 months, not the credentials, not the priority one. Hi, Mike. Ma'am, Hayes said. His voice was somewhere far away. That man has been to my house. I know. He's been to my house, ma'am. He's met my wife. He carved the turkey at my table in November because I've got a bad shoulder, and Hayes stopped. He carved the turkey. Colonel, how long? 4 years. 4, Hayes turned and put both hands on a rack and stood there. 4 years. Colonel, listen to me. You need to hear this now and not in the report. Emily's voice was low and fast. He's been slow walking them for 4 months. He's been feeding them garbage since March. The reason your base is not gutted right now is the man on that floor. Hayes turned. Ma'am, he sold us. Yes. 4 years. Yes. And you want me to? I don't want you to do anything, Colonel. I want you to stand there and hold 2 true things at once, because that's the entire job. Emily stepped in front of him. He sold you, and he saved that kid. Biden. Both. If you can only carry one of those, you're going to spend the rest of your career walking past training halls and not opening the door. Hayes flinched like she'd hit him. 1536. Ma'am, Noah Bennett said. Everyone turned. The kid was still standing in the doorway. He hadn't moved in 14 minutes. Bennett, ma'am, permission to say one thing. No, ma'am. Bennett, whatever you're about to say, you're 22 years old and you found out an hour ago that your father died in a way nobody will explain to you, and you are not in any condition to, ma'am. The room stopped. 150 men couldn't shut this kid up at 1408, and neither could a captain at 1536. Emily Carter looked at him. Go ahead, Private. Noah walked across that room. He walked past Ryan Mitchell. He walked past Doyle. He walked past a full colonel. And he stopped in front of David Kessler and got down on one knee. Mr. Kessler. Kessler wouldn't look up. Mr. Kessler, look at me. Kid, please. Look at Menotema. Kessler looked up, and Noah Bennett said, "Did you know my dad?" The room went white with silence. Kessler's face crumpled. "No," he said. "No, son. I never met him. I only read about him." "What did it say, Bennett?" Emily said sharply. "Ma'am, with respect, everybody in this room has read a file about my father except me." Noah didn't turn around. His eyes stayed on Kessler. "You've read it. She's read it. Sergeant Mitchell was there. My mother's been calling a phone number for 11 years, and every single person in this room knows more about my own father than I do." Nobody said anything. "So I'm asking the one man on this base who has no reason left to lie to me," Noah said. "Mr. Kessler, what did it say, 1538? David Kessler looked at that kid for a long, long time. Then he said, "Oi, it said your father refused an order." Ryan Mitchell's head snapped up. "Dave," Emily said, "stop." "Ma'am." "Warrant Officer Kessler, stop talking right now." "Ma'am, he's 22 and I've got nothing left to lose, and you know I'm right." "Dave, I am ordering you." "It said his father refused an order." The room detonated. "It said," Kessler said, and he was shouting now, and it was the first time in 4 years that David Kessler had said a true thing out loud, that Sergeant First Class Daniel Bennett was told to hold position at minute 11, and he looked at Ryan Mitchell and he said, "Mitch, that intel's garbage, we're going." And he went first and Mitchell followed him. Ryan Mitchell said, "Dave." "He went first, Ryan." "Dave, stop." 11 years. Kessler was on his feet somehow. 11 years you've been carrying it, and it was never your call. It was his call. He made the call, and you backed your man, and they hung you for it, because it's easier to hang a sergeant than admit the intel was "stop it." Ryan Mitchell's scream took the roof off. And then there was nothing. 1539. Noah Bennett stood up very slowly. He turned around. He looked at Ryan Mitchell. "Sergeant," he said. "Bennett, don't." "Sergeant, is that true?" "Bennett, is that true?" Ryan Mitchell stood in a server room at Fort Liberty with his back against the door frame, and 11 years came off him all at once. "Yeah," he said. Noah's chin went. "It was his call. It was his call." "And you?" Noah's voice was gone. "He kept going anyway. You took it. For 11 years, you let everybody think." "He was my friend," Ryan said. "That was all. That was the whole sentence. He was my friend." Doyle turned around and faced the wall. Colonel Hayes had a hand over his mouth. And Captain Emily Carter, who had not shown one single crack in 94 minutes, put her hand flat on a server rack and steadied herself against it, and Noah Bennett saw her do it, and he was the only one. "Sergeant," Noah said, "don't." "Sergeant, my mother thinks he did something wrong." Ryan Mitchell's face. "She thinks he did something wrong," Noah said, "because nobody ever called her back. 11 years. She thinks she's told me, Sergeant. She said it to me at the kitchen table. She thinks maybe he messed up, and that's why nobody will talk to us." Ryan Mitchell slid down the doorframe and sat on the floor. "Oh, God," he said. "Sergeant, oh, God, kid, I didn't know she." "Nobody knew," Noah was shouting now. "Nobody knew because nobody talks. That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing everybody in this room has been doing all day. You didn't talk. He didn't talk. The colonel didn't talk. And my mom's been sitting in a kitchen in Pennsylvania for 11 years thinking her husband was a screw-up because 150 grown men decided it was safer to be quiet." 1541, nobody breathed. And Captain Emily Carter said very quietly, "That's the report." Everyone turned. "That's it," she said. "That's what I came to write. 11 weeks of work, 3 days on this base, 96 minutes in this building, and a private just wrote it for me in one sentence." She looked around at all of them. "You are not a weak base because you're mean," she said. "You're a weak base because you are quiet." Every single hole they walked through today was a hole that silence made. A sergeant who wouldn't say he was hurting. A colonel who wouldn't open a door. A staff sergeant who filed 3 complaints and got noted 3 times and stopped filing. A warrant officer who did one stupid thing 4 years ago and didn't tell one human being. And a woman in Pennsylvania who nobody called back. Silence. "They didn't beat you," Emily said. "You just never said anything out loud and they walked in." 1543, Hayes said, "Ma'am, the MPs." "Bring them." "Ma'am, what do I tell them?" And Emily said, "Tell them a warrant officer walked himself in." Kessler's head came up. "Ma'am, You walked yourself in, Dave. At 14:51, you sent a priority one, and at 15:21, you put the cable down, and you did it with a room full of witnesses. Emily's voice was flat. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm writing what happened. There's a difference, and you're going to need to know it in about 11 months when a lawyer asks you. Kessler was crying again. It's not going to save me. No. Then why? Because it's true, Emily said. And because there's a 26-year-old in Ohio who's going to read a transcript someday, and I'd like the transcript to be accurate. David Kessler put his hands over his face and sobbed like a child. 15:45. The MPs came. They came in fast and hard and professional, and they had Kessler up and cuffed in 11 seconds. And the strange thing, the thing that Doyle would remember, was that nobody said anything ugly. Not one word. 4 MPs and a warrant officer, and it was the quietest arrest anybody had ever seen. At the door, Kessler stopped. Ma'am, Emily said, Dave. March 14th. I know. There's a second folder. The room froze. Dave, Emily said carefully. Say that again. There's a second folder, ma'am. They sent 2 in March. Kessler's eyes were red and dead and absolutely clear. One was Bennett, and the other one, David Kessler looked at her. Ma'am, he said, the other one was you. 15:46, nobody moved. Ryan Mitchell came up off that floor like he'd been electrocuted. Say again. Hush. They had a folder on Phantom, Kessler said, in March, 4 months ago, before she was ever assigned here. That's not possible, Hayes said. Colonel, I'm looking at the woman right now, and she's not surprised, Kessler said. Every head in that room turned, and Captain Emily Carter stood there with her face like a closed door. Ma'am, Ryan said slowly. Ma'am, why aren't you surprised? Emily didn't answer. Ma'am, Sergeant Mitchell. Ma'am, why aren't you surprised? And Emily Carter said, because I sent it. 15:47, the silence was total. Ma'am, Hayes's voice had nothing in it. What did you just say? I said I sent it, Colonel. Emily didn't move. 11 weeks ago, I needed to know if there was a channel into this base. So I built a folder on a Navy captain named Emily Carter, call sign Phantom, with a nice green highlight on the part where she's got no family and a habit of working alone, and I put it in the water and I waited to see who picked it up. Nobody breathed. Somebody picked it up in 11 days, Emily said. That's how I knew. Ma'am, Ryan's voice was very quiet, you used yourself as bait. I used a file as bait, with your name on it. Yes, with your real name on it. Sergeant, there's no other kind that works. Ryan Mitchell stared at her. Ma'am, he said, that means they've had 4 months to plan for you. Yes. That means everything that happened in that training hall today. Sergeant. Everything, ma'am. The clipboard, the drills, all of it. They were watching that. And Emily Carter said, Sergeant, why do you think I let you do it? The floor went out from under 150 men who weren't even in the room. Ma'am, Doyle said, I walked into that hall at 1400 hours with no name tape and no rank because I needed to see who moved, Emily said. Not who was strong, who moved. I needed 47 minutes of 150 men reacting to a stranger with no protection because whoever was watching would react too, and Kessler walked out that door at 14:06 and he didn't laugh. Kessler said from the doorway, you saw me. Dave, I saw you on Tuesday. David Kessler's mouth opened. I saw you in the motor pool on Tuesday at 15:20, and you looked at me for 1 second too long, Emily said. 1 second. That's all it was. Everybody else looked at me for 0 seconds because a small woman in a gray shirt isn't worth 1 second, and you gave me one, and that's when I knew there was somebody home. Kessler leaned against an MP. 3 days, he said, 3 days ago. 3 days ago. Ma'am, I've been walking around this base for 3 days thinking I know exactly what you were thinking, Dave. You've been thinking about it for 4 months, and I've been reading it in your face since Tuesday afternoon. 15:49. Ryan Mitchell said, ma'am. Emily turned. Ma'am, when you walked into my hall today, when I put my hands on you. Emily said nothing. You knew he was watching. Nothing. Ma'am, did you need me to do that? And Captain Emily Carter looked at Sergeant Ryan Mitchell, and for the first time all day, she looked tired. No, she said. Ma'am. No, Sergeant, I didn't need you to do that. Her voice was quiet and completely level. I needed somebody to do something. I didn't know it'd be that. I hoped it wouldn't be. Ryan's jaw moved. But you used it. Yes. You let me humiliate myself in front of 150 men. You did that? I let you finish. Ma'am, that's... Sergeant, would you like me to lie to you? Ryan stopped. Because I can Emily said. I'm extremely good at it. I could tell you right now that it was all part of the plan and you were essential and it was noble and you'd feel better for about 11 days. Or I can tell you the truth, which is that a man put his hands on me at 14:05 and I let him because letting him was worth more than stopping him. And I've been carrying that decision since 14:05 and I'll carry it home tonight. Nobody spoke. That's the job, Emily said. That's the whole job, Sergeant. You want to know what a ghost is? It's not the shooting. Anybody can shoot. It's standing in a room while 150 men laugh at you and doing the math on whether it's worth it. Ryan Mitchell's eyes were wet. Was it worth it? And Emily said, ask Bennett's mother. 15:51. Noah Bennett said, ma'am. Emily turned to him. Private. Ma'am, what happens to my mom? And Captain Emily Carter, 34 years old, 5'4" in a plain gray shirt with nothing on the collar, said, somebody's going to call her back. Noah's face broke. Ma'am? Tonight, Emily said, not in a month, not after the review. Tonight, private, and it's not going to be a voicemail, and it's not going to be a clerk. Ma'am, who's going to call her? Emily Carter turned and looked at Sergeant Ryan Mitchell. And Ryan Mitchell stood in that server room and understood what she was asking him to do, and every single thing in his body said no. 11 years. 11 years of not saying it out loud. Ma'am, he said, and his voice was a wreck. I can't. I know. Ma'am, I can't. Please. And ask me to do anything else. And ask me to go back in that hall and tell 150 men what I am. I'll do it right now. I'll do it in front of a camera. Sergeant. Ma'am, she doesn't know my name and I've been alive for 11 years and her husband hasn't, and I can't call that woman Ryan. He stopped. Sergeant, Emily said, pick up the phone. And Ryan Mitchell put his hands over his face and stood there for 11 seconds. Then he said, what do I tell her? And Emily Carter said, tell her he went first. Ryan Mitchell took the phone. 15:53. He held it in his hand like it was something that might go off. Ma'am, I don't have her number. Emily said, Bennett. Noah's voice came out of him small and cracked. Ma'am, give the sergeant your mother's number. Ma'am, Noah stopped. His hands were shaking. Ma'am, she's at work. She works till 6. She's a school secretary. Ma'am, if he calls her at work, she's going to think somebody else died. Everybody in that room stopped because that was it. That was the whole 11 years in one sentence. A woman who had been trained by silence to believe that a phone call from the Army meant only one thing. Emily closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Sergeant Mitchell, she said, sit down. Ma'am, sit down on the floor, right there. Ryan sat. Bennett, sit down next to him. Noah didn't move. Private. Ma'am, I can't sit next to him. I know you can't, Emily said. Sit down anyway. 15:54. Noah Bennett walked across a server room floor and sat down 18 inches from the man who had made him run a hill in the rain for asking a question, and neither of them looked at each other, and Colonel Michael Hayes turned around and faced a wall because he could not watch it. Now, Emily said, you're going to call her at 6:10, not before, and Bennett's going to call her first. Noah's head came up. Ma'am, you call your mother at 6 o'clock. You tell her you're fine. You tell her nothing happened to you. You say it in the first 4 words, private, because that's the only thing she's going to hear until you say it. Emily's voice was steady as a heartbeat. Then you tell her a man is going to call her at 6:10 and he knew your father and he's going to tell her the truth. Noah started crying. He didn't make a sound. 22 years old, sitting on a floor, and the tears just came. Ma'am, she's been waiting 11 years. I know. 11 years and it's just a phone call. And Emily Carter said, private, it was always just a phone call. That's what nobody in this building can stand to hear. 15:56. Ryan Mitchell said, ma'am. Sergeant, I need to say something, and I need to say it in front of the colonel. Hayes turned around. Say it, Emily said. Ryan Mitchell looked up from the floor at a full colonel and he said, Sir, I request relief from instructor duty, effective immediately. The room stopped. Sergeant, Hayes started. Sir, I'm not asking. I'm telling you what has to happen. Ryan's voice was gone and he kept going. Sir, there are 150 men in that hall right now lying on the floor because a captain told them to, and every one of them is thinking about how many times they laughed today. And every one of them is going to walk out of that building in an hour, and the first thing they're going to do is decide what this afternoon meant. Sergeant, sir, if I'm still their instructor on Monday, it meant nothing. Ryan's hands were shaking. It means the loud guy screamed, and then he came back, and everything's the same. Sir, I've been the loud guy for 4 years, and I know exactly what they'll take from it because I'd take the same thing. Hayes said nothing. Sir, I'm the lesson, not her, not Kessler, me. Ryan's jaw was working. I'm the thing that has to change, or none of this counts. Doyle said quietly, Sergeant. Don't, Doyle. Sergeant, that's the first smart thing you've said in 6 years. And Ryan Mitchell laughed. Wrecked, real. Yeah, he said. Well, 1558, Emily Carter said no. Every head turned. Ma'am, request denied. Ma'am, that's the colonel's colonel, Emily said without turning. Am I overstepping? Hayes looked at her for a long moment. No, ma'am, he said, you're not. Emily crouched down in front of Ryan Mitchell so she was looking up at him instead of down. Nobody in that room ever forgot that either. Sergeant, she said, you want to quit? Ma'am, that's not... You want to quit, Emily said, and you've dressed it up so beautifully that a full colonel almost let you. And I'm going to tell you what you're actually doing because nobody's told you the truth in 11 years, and I'm not going to start the streak over. Ryan's face went hard. Ma'am, you're about to make one phone call to a woman in Pennsylvania, Emily said, and it is going to be the worst 9 minutes of your life. And you have just figured out that if you resign right now in front of witnesses, you get to be noble instead of accountable. Nobility takes 11 seconds. Accountability takes 4 years. Ryan Mitchell stopped breathing. You want the grand gesture, Emily said. You've always wanted the grand gesture. That's what fear-based leadership is. Sergeant, it's a grand gesture every day forever because a grand gesture is fast and actual leadership is slow and boring and nobody claps. Ma'am, I hurt these men. Yes. So how do I... You go back in that hall on Monday, Emily said, and you teach a comms block correctly with the updated jamming profile. And you say Doyle was right and I was wrong out loud in front of everybody. And then you teach the block and then you do it again Tuesday and then 150 more times. And in 4 years, somebody in that room will make a hard call and back his man and nobody will ever know it started here. Ryan's eyes were streaming. That's it. That's it, Emily said. That's all leadership has ever been. It's the least dramatic thing in the world, and that's why nobody does it. 1600, Colonel Hayes said, ma'am. Colonel, then what happens to me? And the room went very quiet because that was the question nobody had asked. Emily stood up. Colonel, how many times did you walk past that hall? Ma'am, how many times? 3 times a week, Hayes said. Go find that's the age, yeah, for 4 years. And you heard it. Yes, say the rest. Hayes's voice went. I heard it and I kept walking because his pass rates were the best on the base, and I didn't want to lose them. Colonel, Emily said, Sergeant Mitchell hurt 150 men. You authorized it. Hayes stood there and took it. Ma'am, he said, are you going to end my career? No. Ma'am, Colonel, I'm going to do something worse. Emily's voice was almost gentle. I'm going to leave you here. Hayes's face. You're going to stay at Fort Liberty, and you're going to read my report, and my report is going to have your name in it 14 times, and every one of those 14 is going to be a door you walk past. Emily didn't blink. And then you're going to have 4 years to open them. That's what I want, not your retirement. Your Tuesdays. Nobody spoke. Colonel, Emily said, you've been a good officer and a coward, and those two things have been living in the same man for 6 years, and today they finally met each other. Hayes put a hand over his eyes. Ma'am, he said. Yes, ma'am. 1602. The MPs took David Kessler out. At the door, he stopped one last time. Ma'am, Emily said, Dave, they're going to send somebody else. The room went cold. He said, I know, Emily said. No, ma'am, listen. Kessler's eyes were absolutely clear. You don't build a 4-month channel and walk away. There's a bench. There's always a bench. Somebody's already here. Ryan Mitchell came up off the floor. Ma'am, Sergeant, sit down. Ma'am, he just said, I heard exactly what he said. Emily said, and I've known it since Tuesday, and it's the reason I'm not leaving tonight. Kessler nodded slowly. Ma'am, one thing. Say it. The bench is an S6. Emily's head came up half an inch. That was all. Half an inch. And every man in that room saw it, and every man in that room understood that they had just watched Captain Emily Carter be surprised for the first time in 122 minutes. Dave, she said carefully, where's the bench? David Kessler looked at her. Ma'am, he said, it's in the hall. And then the MPs took him out the door. 1604. Nobody moved. Ma'am, Doyle said. Ma'am, what did he mean it's in the hall? Emily didn't answer. Ma'am, there's 148 men lying face down on the floor of that hall right now. I know. Ma'am, Staff Sergeant. Emily's voice was very quiet. How many men in that hall didn't laugh at 1405? Doyle's mouth opened. 2, Ryan Mitchell said. Everyone turned. 1. 2, ma'am. Ryan's face was blank. I was watching. I always watch. That's the whole trick. You say something and you find out who's with you. His jaw moved. Kessler didn't laugh and one other guy didn't laugh. Who? Ryan Mitchell said, Kane. 1605. The room detonated. Kane's downstairs, Doyle said. Kane's sitting on the floor of that hall right now. Ma'am, he handed you the phone he gave you He gave me a phone with one message on it, Emily said. Everything stopped. Ma'am, one message, Doyle. One. Emily's voice was flat and fast. 1451 in 1453 out. A 4-year source with one message on his phone. Doyle's face went gray. That's a burner, Ryan said. That's a burner, Emily said. That's a clean device with exactly one exchange on it, and he handed it to me crying in front of 150 men. Ma'am, he broke. I watched him break. Staff Sergeant, Emily said, I've watched a lot of men break, and I have never once watched one break on schedule. 1606. Ryan Mitchell was already moving. Sergeant? Ma'am, he's sitting in a room with 148 men. Sergeant Mitchell, stop. And every one of them's got their face on the floor because you told them to, Ryan, he stopped in the doorway, and Emily Carter said, that's the second bad order I've given you today. Don't take this one either. Ryan turned around. Ma'am, think. Emily's hands were open. Kane didn't laugh at 1405. Kane didn't reach for his phone at 1511. Kane's been in that hall since 1400 hours with 148 witnesses. Sergeant, what has he been doing for 2 hours? Ryan's face changed. Watching you, he said. Watching me do what? And Ryan Mitchell said very slowly, take Kessler apart. Nobody breathed. Kane's not the bench, Emily said. Kane's the camera. Doyle said, oh my God. They didn't send 2, Emily said. They sent 1 and a witness. Kessler was the asset. Kane was there to watch what happened when the asset burned and report exactly how we did it and how fast and who we talked to and what a ghost looks like when she's working. Ryan's voice was barely there. Ma'am, he's been watching you for 2 hours. He's been watching me for 3 days. 1608. Ma'am, Noah Bennett said. He was still sitting on the floor. Ma'am, then he's got everything. Yes. He's got everything you did, every question you asked. Ma'am, that's, Noah's voice broke. Ma'am, that's how they learn. And Captain Emily Carter turned and looked at that 22-year-old private, and something crossed her face that none of them had seen all day. Respect. Say the rest, Bennett, Noah swallowed. Ma'am, they don't care about Fort Liberty, he said. They care about you. They wanted to see how you work. Silence. Private, Emily said. In 11 weeks, you're the first person to say that out loud. Doyle said, ma'am, then we go get him. Right now. No. Ma'am. Doyle, if we take Kane, we get 1 man and a bad afternoon. Emily's eyes went somewhere far away. If we leave him, we get 4 years of everything they ask him. Ryan Mitchell said, ma'am, you're going to leave him in place. Emily didn't answer. Ma'am, that's 148 men. Sergeant, I know exactly how many men it is. Ma'am, one of my guys. Sergeant Mitchell. Emily turned on him, and it was the closest she came all today to anger. Do you want to know what the job is? Right now, this is it. This is the actual thing. Not the clipboard, not the rifle, not 11 seconds on a breech frame. This. Ryan's jaw locked. Standing in a room deciding whether to leave a snake in a barracks for 4 years because it's worth more than the sleep of 148 men, Emily said. That's the job. That's the whole job. And there's nobody to ask and nobody to blame and nobody will ever know, and you'll carry it home tonight and every night after. Nobody spoke. You asked me at 14:05 what I was, Emily said. That's what I am. 16:10. Ryan Mitchell said, "Ma'am, don't." Emily looked at him. "Ma'am, I'm asking you, don't." His voice was cracking. Not because of the rules, not because of the report. "Ma'am, I've spent 11 years with a thing I couldn't tell anybody, and today it damn near killed a man on his knees in this room, and you're about to build one for yourself and call it duty." Emily said nothing. "Ma'am, you don't have anybody." The room went still. "That's what was in the folder, wasn't it?" Ryan said. "The green highlight, no family, works alone." His voice broke wide open. "Ma'am, you wrote your own crack, and you were right about it." And for the first time in 128 minutes, Captain Emily Carter had nothing to say. 16:11, Colonel Michael Hayes said, "Ma'am." She turned. "Ma'am, I'm going to say something, and I'm probably going to regret it," Hayes said. "But you told me 40 minutes ago that this base is weak because nobody talks. So I'm going to talk." "Colonel, take him," Hayes said. "Take Kane tonight, publicly, in front of every man in that hall." "Colonel, that's 4 years of intelligence you're throwing away." "Ma'am, I know exactly what it is." Hayes stood up straight. "And I've spent 6 years making the efficient choice, and it cost me a warrant officer who carved my turkey, a sergeant who's been dying in my building for 4 years, and a woman in Pennsylvania who thinks her husband was a screw-up." Nobody breathed. "Ma'am, you told me to hold 2 true things at once," Hayes said. "So here's mine. Leaving Kane in place is the correct call, and I will not do it. Both. Put it in your report." Emily Carter looked at him, and a very small thing happened at the corner of her mouth. "Colonel," she said, "that's the first order you've given in 4 years." "Ma'am, and it's wrong," Hayes flinched, "and you gave it anyway." Emily said out loud in front of witnesses, knowing it was wrong because you decided 148 men sleeping was worth more than 4 years of traffic. She turned to the door. "Doyle." "Ma'am." "Go get Sergeant Kane." Doyle went out of that room like a shot. 16:13. Ryan Mitchell said, "Ma'am, you were never going to leave him." Emily said no. "Then why?" "Because I needed to know if a full colonel would say it out loud." Emily's voice was quiet. "Sergeant, that's the report. That's the last line of it. Fort Liberty is fixable, and the reason it's fixable is that at 16:11 on a Thursday, a man who'd been quiet for 6 years finally opened his mouth and told a Navy captain she was wrong." Hayes turned away and put a hand over his face. "Ma'am, Colonel, you don't have to say anything." "Ma'am, I've got 4 years of—" "You've got Tuesdays," Emily said. "That's all any of us have got. Start Tuesday." 16:15. They took Kane in the hall, 148 men on their feet at attention watching. And Sergeant First Class Kane, 14 years, a wedding ring, and a burner phone with one message on it, didn't say a word. He didn't cry this time. That was the thing Doyle noticed. At 15:12, he'd cried like a child, and at 16:15, he stood there with his hands behind his back and his face like glass, and he looked at Emily Carter the whole way out. And at the door, he smiled at her. It was the only thing all day that put ice in that room. "Ma'am," Ryan said quietly. He smiled. "I know." "Ma'am, what does that mean?" And Emily Carter said, "It means he thinks he won." "Did he?" Emily watched the door close. "Ask me in 4 years," she said. 16:18. The hall was silent. 148 men and Colonel Michael Hayes and Staff Sergeant Doyle and Sergeant Ryan Mitchell and Private Noah Bennett and a small woman in a gray shirt with nothing on the collar standing exactly where she'd been standing at 14:05. "Gentlemen," Emily said. Nobody moved. 2 hours and 18 minutes ago, I walked into this building and every one of you laughed at me. Nobody breathed. "I want to tell you what that cost." She let it sit. "It cost a warrant officer who spent 4 months protecting a private in this room from something none of you knew was happening. It cost a sergeant first class who's been running a channel for 4 years while you laughed at his jokes in the chow hall. It cost a staff sergeant 3 complaints and 2 years of his life. It cost that man, she pointed at Ryan and every head turned, 11 years of believing he killed 4 men when he didn't. And it cost a woman in Pennsylvania 11 years of thinking her husband was a coward. Somebody in the third row made a sound. And every single one of those things Emily said was paid for with silence. Nobody moved. You want to know how a foreign service takes an American base, Emily said. They don't. They can't. Nobody can. There's not an army on earth that can take this base. She looked around at all of them. They just wait for you to stop talking to each other. 1621. Sergeant Mitchell. Ryan snapped to. Ma'am. Front. He walked to the center of the floor, the exact spot where he'd thrown her clipboard at a wall 2 hours and 16 minutes earlier. Sergeant, tell them. Ryan Mitchell looked at 148 men who had been afraid of him for 4 years, and his voice came out steady. At 14:05 today, I grabbed a captain by the collar and I threw her paperwork at that wall, he said. And 149 of you laughed. Silence. One of you didn't, Ryan said. Bennett, third row, 16 weeks in the Army. He told me to stop. Every head in that hall turned. And I made him regret it, Ryan said, in front of all of you, because that's what I do. That's what I've done every day for 4 years, and I want every single one of you to hear me say this out loud right now so nobody has to wonder about it in the chow hall tonight. He stopped. He got it out anyway. I was wrong, Ryan Mitchell said, about all of it. About the drills, about the comms block, about Doyle, about Bennett, about what a strong man is. All of it. 4 years I was wrong. Nobody in that hall moved. And I'm going to be standing right here Monday at 0800 teaching comms with the updated profile, Ryan said. Because Doyle was right and I marked it noted 3 times, and if any one of you has got something to say to me about that, you say it Monday in front of everybody, and I will stand here and take it. Doyle turned his face to the ceiling. That's it, Ryan said. That's all I got. 1624, Emily Carter said Bennett. Noah's head came up. Front. He walked out of the third row. 148 men watched a 22-year-old private walk to the center of the floor and stand next to the hardest man at Fort Liberty. Gentlemen, Emily said, at 14:08 this afternoon, this private opened his mouth for a stranger with no rank, no protection, and nothing to gain. Nobody spoke. He didn't know who I was. That's the part I need you to hold on to. He didn't do it because he saw a captain. Emily's voice went hard. He did it because he saw a person getting hurt, and he couldn't make himself stay quiet. She looked around. That's the only thing that's ever saved anybody, she said. Not strength, not rank, not 12 years and 3 rotations, just some kid who couldn't stay quiet. Emily turned to Noah. Private Bennett, ma'am. At 0600 Monday, you report to Colonel Hayes' office for advanced leadership selection. Noah's mouth opened. Ma'am, I've been in the Army 4 months. 16 weeks, Emily said. And in 16 weeks, you've done the one thing that 148 men with more time than you couldn't do in 4 years. Ma'am, I'm not. Private, don't finish that sentence. Noah stopped. You were going to say you're not special, Emily said. You're right, you're not. That's exactly why it matters. If it took something special, nobody could do it. It doesn't. It took a 22-year-old with a shaky voice saying, with respect, Sergeant, in a room where nobody else would. She looked at the hall. Every man in here could have done it, Emily said. That's the part that's going to keep you up tonight. Not that he was brave, that you could have been. Nobody in that hall ever forgot that sentence, 1628. Ma'am, Doyle said, permission to ask. Staff Sergeant. Ma'am, who are you? And 148 men leaned in because 2 hours and 23 minutes later, that was still the only question in the building. Emily Carter looked at him. Staff Sergeant, you don't have the clearance, she said, and Ryan Mitchell laughed. It came out of him loud and real and ragged, and then Doyle laughed, and then somebody in the back laughed, and the sound went through that hall like something breaking open. 148 men laughing at 14. 05's joke turned inside out, and it was the first honest sound that building had made in 4 years. Emily let it run. Then she said, gentlemen, attention. They snapped to, all of them, instantly, and there was nothing in it about fear. You'll never see me again, Emily said. There won't be a ceremony. There won't be a mention. In about 90 minutes, I'm going to walk out of that gate, and in 6 months, half of you will have convinced yourselves I was 3 inches taller. Nobody breathed. So I'm going to leave you with one thing, and then I'm going to go on. She looked around that hall at every single face. Anybody can be brave when 150 people are watching, Emily Carter said. Bennett wasn't. Bennett was brave when he was sure it would cost him everything and nobody would ever know. Kessler was brave for 4 months in a room by himself where nobody would ever know. Mitchell was brave for 11 years carrying something for a dead friend where nobody would ever know. She let it sit. Character isn't what you do in front of the room, she said. It's what you do when you're certain nobody will ever find out. 16:31. She turned to go. Ma'am, Ryan Mitchell said. She stopped. Ma'am, it's 6:09. Emily Carter turned around, and Sergeant Ryan Mitchell was standing in the middle of that hall with a phone in his hand and 148 men watching him, and his hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold it. Ma'am, I can't do it out there, he said. I tried. I stood in that hallway for 4 minutes and I couldn't. Sergeant, ma'am, if I walk out that door, I'm not going to call her. His voice broke completely. I've had 11 years to walk out a door. Ma'am, please, make me do it here. The hall went absolutely silent, and Captain Emily Carter said, Sergeant Mitchell, dial. He dialed. 148 men stood at attention and listened to a phone ring on speaker in a training hall at Fort Liberty. It rang twice. A woman's voice said, Hello, Miso. Ryan Mitchell's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Hello, she said. Is somebody there? Doyle put a hand over his mouth. Noah Bennett was crying openly. Colonel Michael Hayes stood at attention with tears running down his face and did not move. Sergeant, Emily said quietly, say his name. And Ryan Mitchell said, Ma'am, my name is Ryan Mitchell. I was with your husband. There was a sound on that line, a small, terrible 11-year sound. I'm sorry it took me this long, Ryan said. I'm sorry nobody called you back. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm so sorry. Was he alone? She said. And 148 men heard a woman ask the only question she'd had for 11 years. No, ma'am, Ryan Mitchell said. He wasn't alone. He was with me. She started crying. Ma'am, Ryan said, he didn't do anything wrong. Whatever they let you believe, ma'am. Listen to me. He didn't do anything wrong. He made a call, and he was right. He was right, ma'am. He was right, and I've known it for 11 years, and nobody would let me tell you. He was right. He went first, Ryan Mitchell said. And the woman on the other end of that line made a sound that nobody in that hall ever got over. Say it again, she said. He went first, ma'am. 16:36. Captain Emily Carter turned around and walked out of that hall. Nobody stopped her. Nobody saluted because she'd have hated it. She walked out of the building that she'd been thrown against at 14:05, past the spot where her clipboard hit the wall, and she left 148 American soldiers standing at attention, listening to a widow in Pennsylvania say her husband's name out loud for the first time in 11 years. She never came back. There was no ceremony. There was no mention. There is no record of Captain Emily Carter at Fort Liberty on that Thursday, and there never will be. But 4 years later, Sergeant Major Ryan Mitchell stood in that same hall at 0800 on a Monday and told 200 new soldiers, Doyle was right and I was wrong. Because he'd said it every Monday for 4 years and he'd never missed one. And Captain Noah Bennett, 26 years old, sat in the third row with his mother's photograph in his breast pocket. And nobody in that room knew why. That was the point. They thought they were judging a woman. They were standing in front of a legend, and the legend never told them because the only strength that ever counts is the kind nobody's watching.